Hello and welcome to From Rewatch with Love, a James Bond cinematic rewatch podcast. My name is Graham Stark, and joining me as always is Matt Wiggins.
Hello!
And today we are looking at the 2002 film Die Another Day. Let's get into it. That was sparkling water, if anyone's curious.
Oh, I'm also drinking sparkling water.
Oh, nice. The movie has a reputation, I think it's fair to say. People have been talking about the impending specter, no pun intended, of Die Another Day looming over the horizon for some time now. And it's here, and it's about what I remember.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's about what I remember as well.
Which is to say, it's not great.
No.
There's an unfortunate moment in one of the special features with director Lee Tamahori talking about how when you're making a Bond film, you're not just making this one film, you are joining this pantheon of films, and you are petrified of being the one who makes the bad Bond film.
Oh, no.
And I'm just watching it going, oh, you poor guy.
Oh, no.
All the behind the scenes features about everyone working so hard to make sure all the stunts work and building all these amazing sets and everything. And it's the ultimate result of everything is just a pretty disappointing movie.
Disappointing is being pretty generous. I would go so far as to apply a different D word. This movie is dire. Like, it's not good with a capital N and a capital G. Like, it is not unwatchable.
No.
Like, we'll get into it, but my biggest problems with this movie are similar to my biggest problems with the previous movie, in that everything in this movie is trying so hard and way overdoing it. Like, way overdoing it. The thing that struck me is that this movie is basically just Diamonds Are Forever Extreme. The plot's not that different, but everything is extreme. Almost nowhere in the film is it dialing things back or taking things easy or making things look effortless. Everything has to be turned up to 11 at all times, and it's really frequently to the detriment of the film.
Yeah. As an example, generally speaking, the Bond films don't typically fall into the trap of doing things that are trendy in other movies at the time. Now, we talked way back about Live and Let Die trying to capitalize on blaxploitation, and then Man with a Golden Gun trying to capitalize on kung fu movies. But those were thematic things. I'm talking about sort of, there are many moments throughout this movie that have the footage either played in slow motion or way too fast, and that immediately dates it as, oh, this came out around the year 2000.
Yeah, and that's like the worst thing about this movie is it's relatively speaking one of the newer films, right? Like, there are only 4 more Bond movies for us to go through before we get to No Time to Die.
Right.
And this is the most dated feeling movie we have watched so far.
God, it really is. It really is. Oh, just so many times, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about if you've seen it, but so many times there's a camera move that is slightly orbiting, moving from left to right or right to left, and it's speed ramped so that it goes very, very fast and then slows down. So it does this like whoosh, and it's like, stop doing that. You are not the Matrix. God, The Matrix was a great movie that had a lot to answer for in terms of things that it did right and then just ruined for action movies for the next like 5 or 6 years.
Oh, absolutely. But the way that previous movies have picked up what's trendy in filmmaking have always been, they bring those things into the James Bond house style, so to speak, right? Like they're a Bond movie first, and they're picking up things that are popular and incorporating them along the way.
With the possible asterisk of License to Kill.
Possible asterisk of License to Kill, but even it tried. It just sort of failed. Whereas this is picking up all the stylistic quirks of the cinema at the time and sort of papering that over a Bond movie plot, but it feels like they've incorporated the wrong part as compared to all the previous films.
Made on a budget of $142 million in 2002. That's $205 million today in 2020.
All right.
However, it made $623.5 million. This was, until Casino Royale, this was the highest grossing Bond film adjusted for inflation.
Fascinating.
They had a huge marketing push. It was the 40th anniversary. It was the 20th Bond film, a fact that they lampshade in the movie.
Yeah.
Halle Berry was in it. She just won an Oscar.
Like, this is going to be a fascinating movie for us to dig into, because it's like the cast for this movie is stacked. The budget is there. You're right. It is like the 20th movie and the 40th anniversary. And they, again, overdo it in terms of trying to acknowledge that in the film. But nothing in this movie works. Like, it all falls apart. It's a heck of a thing. What did audiences have to say about it at the time of its release?
Mixed. Responses were mixed. I mean, I can tell you, as someone who was in the audience at the time of its release, I did not enjoy it. I remember, you might have been there. We might have seen this movie together. I don't know.
Oh, I expect so.
But I remember coming out of it and going like, I didn't like that.
Yeah, I don't have any fond recollection of this movie. I don't recall ever seeing this movie and really enjoying it.
Yeah, it was definitely mixed at the time. There were many folks that were like, yeah, you know what? That was a solid Bond film. Ticks all the boxes. And there were other folks that were like, this had some problems. So, okay, the movie begins. Let's just dive in.
All right.
The movie starts and immediately upsets me. Because they do the gun barrel sequence, Bond shoots his gun, and they've added now a CG bullet from his gun that goes straight down the barrel of the point of view camera barrel. And it looks stupid and makes no sense.
I almost texted you about that last night when I sat down to watch it. Because I saw it and I was like, woof, I forgot about the bullet.
So did I. It caught me off guard, and I was immediately like, oh, starting how we mean to continue, are we? I do not like that.
Yeah, it takes them, 22 seconds of screen time before we have the first instance of them wildly overdoing it.
Yeah, it is. Everything is just overdone. Oh, God, I got some stuff to talk about overdone later, but yeah. The gun holder is killed by a bullet going all the way down their gun and out the back somehow. The iris opens up on the beach on the Pukchong coast in North Korea, because it's not even central, part of this movie involves the conflict between North and South Korea. So let's actually just get that out of the way right now. Boy, did they not like this movie in North Korea.
I can't imagine why.
Boy, did they also not like this movie in South Korea.
I can't imagine why.
All of Korea. This was 2002, right? The 2000 Sydney Olympics is when we famously saw Korea enter the arena in the opening ceremony as a unified Korea.
Right.
A lot of progress was being made around this time to de-escalate tension between North and South Korea. And then in bumbles James Bond going, all North Koreans are war-hungry monsters who want to steamroll South Korea. And, like Fallout meme, everybody disliked that. This wasn't outright banned in South Korea, but many theaters chose not to screen it there.
Right.
It went over like a dull thud. Nobody thought this was a good idea. So out at sea, we see a big wave and a surfer wearing like some black camouflage outfit surfing. And there's, to its credit, a very cool shot of a second surfer like appearing out of the surf behind, and then a third. And so eventually you get that there's three surfers wearing this like blue on black camo surfing ashore because it's a stealth mission.
I kind of like it. This is no dumber than any other Bond movie. It works.
Absolutely. It's a little silly, but I'm like, you know what? I'm fine. I'm in. No problem. Go for it. The beach is littered with, big, I don't know what they're called, but like those big three-dimensional X's made out of iron girder. What the hell are they called?
I have no idea, but I know what you're talking about. That they're like the anti-landing craft things that they put. They're in Saving Private Ryan. They're the things that the American soldiers hide behind as they're storming Omaha Beach.
Those things.
The metal things.
So the three surfers come ashore. One of them removes their balaclava, and it's Bond. They rush onto land. It's Bond and two, we can assume, Koreans, and they disrupt a radar beacon and place their own replacement radar beacon to confuse the heading of a helicopter that adjusts its heading, changes course, and lands where they now expect it to. So they've sort of like interfered with someone's GPS essentially and asked them to land somewhere where they weren't originally supposed to land. And a guy gets out. You realize that Bond, now that he's removed his wetsuit, is dressed exactly the same as this guy, and he takes that guy's briefcase and sunglasses. Basically what's happened here is that Bond is now replacing this guy. The two Koreans who are with him are replacing the crew of the helicopter. They're gonna, I don't know, tie them up, knock them out, whatever, and they're now gonna continue whatever mission these guys were going on to be like, yes, it was us all along. This is great. This is still going swimmingly.
Mm-hmm.
In the helicopter, Bond opens the briefcase. It is full of diamonds. He places 2 bricks of C4 in the briefcase and a detonator pin from his watch, and then puts the diamonds back on top of the C4 so that you can't see it. The helicopter heads towards what we are told by a subtitle is Colonel Tan Sun Moon's headquarters in the demilitarized zone in North Korea. And we go inside to see Colonel Moon, who is going absolutely ham on a speed bag, and then he instructs one of his men to open the bag, which is unzipped, and a man falls out. So I guess not a speed bag, like a full...
It's like a heavy bag.
A heavy bag. But the heavy bag is just like a canvas sack that there's a man inside. And he says, that'll teach you to lecture me. And then instructs his men, find me a new anger management therapist or something. So we've established fairly handily that Colonel Moon has anger problems.
Yes.
I guess because we won't necessarily see him much longer, I want to talk briefly about Will Yun Lee, who plays Colonel Moon.
Yeah.
He has had quite a career, just showing up in a whole lot of stuff. He's been in a bunch of episodes of The Good Doctor as Dr. Alex Park. That's recent. Also in Altered Carbon. Lots of TV roles. He's also the voice of Wei Shen in the video game Sleeping Dogs.
Oh, yeah.
That's the main character in Sleeping Dogs. That's potentially his biggest role, actually, because, you know, main character of a open world sandbox game. That's a lot of dialogue. Also, Sleeping Dogs is great.
So I've heard. I haven't played it, but I've heard it's excellent.
He was also in Elektra, which is, I guess, kind of a shame, and the TV movie and subsequent series of Witchblade. Oh, he was also in The Wolverine.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And in both San Andreas and Rampage. So just sort of, you know, movies that The Rock is in.
You could do worse.
Yeah, yeah.
Rampage is pretty good, actually. Rampage is a fun movie.
Yeah.
That's my recommendation of the day. You want to watch a fun movie, go watch Rampage.
It's going to make watching along with this podcast very confusing if you go, The World Is Not Enough, Rampage, Casino Royale. But anyway, I just wanted to get that out of the way now because he will not be in the movie for much longer, in face at least.
Mm-hmm.
We also see a brief shot of his right-hand man, Zhao, played by Rick Yoon, who was in the very first Fast and Furious movie as Johnny Tran.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, was killed in that one. So is like the only person who's been unable to return to a later Fast and Furious movie.
Was he one of the good guys in that movie? He wasn't, though, was he?
No, but that's never stopped them before.
I guess, but people being dead hasn't stopped them either.
Oh, that's true, yeah. That's a good point. He was also in Ninja Assassin, Olympus Has Fallen, the Prison Break TV series, and the Battle Angel movie.
Oh, yeah.
As the helicopter lands and Bond gets out of the helicopter, Zhao takes a picture of him with his fancy-looking camera phone.
Circa 2002.
Yeah, exactly. Circa 2002. And Bond is now, of course, pretending to be that other guy who is looking to buy a bunch of weapons. Colonel Moon is selling weapons in exchange for a bunch of diamonds. He has expensive taste, as witnessed by a lineup of supercars that are just sort of conspicuously there. And so they do a little, you know, show me the diamonds, show me the weapons. And so then in come a whole bunch of hovercrafts. Hovercrafts are cool.
Hovercrafts are cool.
It is the long-standing opinion of this podcast that hovercrafts are cool.
Remember back in the day when we had one hovercraft?
Yeah.
What if we had 6 hovercraft?
What if they got to have a chase? Bond hands the briefcase over to Zhao so that he can go and inspect the diamonds and make sure that all the contraband is in order. While he's doing that, he gets a text on his Sony Ericsson amazing camera phone with information about who Bond actually is, James Bond, License to Kill, etc., MI6. Zhao then goes and passes this information on to Colonel Moon in English for some reason. They can both speak Korean, and they have both spoken Korean with subtitles already, but for whatever reason, they have this particular conversation in English.
Universal translator activated for this one shot and this one
shot. Everyone's got the Babel fish in. Yeah. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. There's another good movie. Colonel Moon sort of changes on a dime and is like, hey, let me show you one of these great weapons you're about to buy. This is my tank buster gun. Watch this. And he uses it to destroy the helicopter that Bond arrived in, presumably then also killing the crew. And then they have Bond at gunpoint. And he's like, I know who you are. You're not going to get one up on me. Ha 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 ha. They're then interrupted by a radio communication from the Colonel's father, General Moon, who is seeing the smoke from this helicopter that just got blown up and is like, what's going on over there? I'm going to be back home in 10 minutes, young man. And Colonel Moon is like, oh, crap, can't let Dad catch me doing an arms deal. No.
Everybody run, the cops are coming.
Basically what he does, he's like, everyone quick, get all the weapons out of here, kill that guy. So they take Bond over to surround him with a firing squad. It seems inefficient, but whatever. So Bond blows the C4, the briefcase explodes, you hear the whiz as these diamonds fly everywhere, and this kills enough guys and causes enough of a problem to let Bond jump into his own hovercraft and blow up a whole bunch of stuff, including the building, cause just untold havoc. It's absolutely unreal. He manages to get out of this compound. Zhao, in that explosion, has had his face peppered with diamonds, like diamond shrapnel, just all through his face. More on that later. And so then we get a hovercraft chase with Colonel Moon riding a particularly large hovercraft with two smaller sort of satellite hovercrafts traveling with him, and Bond on a yet further hovercraft. And so they have this massive chase that was all shot on the British military army testing grounds. There's a flamethrower. Moon gets that tank buster gun. There's mines. Bond does some no-look shooting. He shoots a bouncing Betty mine, and then it pops up out of the ground and obliterates one of the hovercraft that's chasing him.
Yeah, this whole chase is very bombastic.
It is.
We're still in the realm of overdoing things, although in this case, I'm a little willing to forgive it because this chase scene is kind of rad. Bond is one-handed firing like a Tech 9, right? He's got a machine pistol Uzi kind of thing. And he's one-handed firing that and 360 no-scoping mines from the seat of his hovercraft. As he's escaping the base, he shoots a Porsche with this little gun, and that causes the Porsche to explode. And the Porsche explodes in such a way that it flips backwards onto a bunch of gasoline drums, and they explode. And everything Bond hits with a bullet over the course of this scene explodes in a massive fireball. And it's visually dazzling, but it's very absurd.
I'm not going to be the kind of person who every time they see someone holding a gun screams about trigger discipline when it's in a movie.
Right.
But there's a point in this scene where Bond gets onto Moon's hovercraft and Moon pulls out a pistol and shoots at him, and Bond grabs a randomly discarded bulletproof vest and holds it up in front of him, and the vest soaks up 3 bullets while Bond is moving forward into the path of the bullets as if they are nothing, which is not how a bulletproof vest works. There's still force there. It just stops the bullet from piercing you. Bond should still be reacting to the force of the bullets.
The thing that got me about that scene is they're maybe 8 feet away from each other.
Yeah.
And Moon can see Bond holding the bulletproof jacket up in front of his face and chest. Why are you still shooting at his face and chest?
How does he miss with the flamethrower is another question.
There's still the bottom half of Bond's nothing makes any sense. It's awesome and it's big and loud and cool and whatever. None of it makes any sense. You just sort of have to go with it.
At this point, I want to make it really clear to anybody listening, anybody who's thinking of making a comment. At this point, I am nitpicking because it's kind of fun to do that sometimes, but fundamentally, I'm fine with everything that's happening so far.
Oh, yeah.
In this movie.
This scene is mostly sweet.
Yeah, this is no problem. This is not outside the realm of, sure, it's James Bond.
I mean, especially for the pre-title.
The culmination here is that they're heading towards like a temple bell on a cliff. Bond kicks the hovercraft into high gear, forcing Moon to be like sucked onto the fan at the propulsion fan at the back of it, so that he's like stuck to the grating basically. And they just drive right at this cliff, burst through these wooden doors. There's like a 3-frame shot of Bond going like, what? Because you don't know exactly how he managed to get out of this. And the hovercraft just goes right off the cliff into a waterfall hundreds of feet below. And then you hear this bell going dong, and you realize that Bond leapt up and grabbed the rope that you used to swing the big log into the bell. And then Bond quips, saved by the bell. And, haha, very good. And that's where the opening title should end. But he turns around and there is General Moon and a whole bunch of dudes with guns. And he goes up and asks Bond, like, my son is dead. Or he says basically, like, my son is dead. And Bond just sort of looks at him. Bond has no quip here. And then General Moon barks something in Korean and Bond is taken away. And then we get the opening titles.
We sure do.
So there is the music, which I'll get to in a second. The visuals of these opening titles, well, there's 2 parts to it. On the one hand, there's CG women in fire and ice and electricity in the way that Daniel Kleinman has done CG women for the past couple movies. And it's all very stylish and looks pretty cool. And there's some bits with CG scorpions and stuff. And it's like, generally speaking, all of the abstract elements to the opening title sequence, I'm like, this all tracks. Great.
Yeah.
All of that is overlaid onto and mixed in with 14 months of Bond being tortured.
Yep. The electrical women and the fire women and the ice women and the scorpions all are, it's a metaphor for the various tortures that Bond is being subjected to, which we get to watch as the title sequence goes on.
Yeah. And I don't love it. I like the opening titles being used as a storytelling medium, which we talked about for GoldenEye. It'll happen again a little bit next time in Casino Royale, and that's cool. That aspect is like, okay, sure. I just don't want to watch Bond get waterboarded in the opening titles of a Bond film.
Yeah, so when I watched this the first time, I recall hating this.
Yeah.
Hating this.
Same.
Particularly in 2002, when I was, I guess, 19 years old. My whole thing would have been like, Bond is the super spy. He doesn't get caught and tortured. This isn't allowed. It's against the rules. I'm softer on that now. I actually think it's fine.
So am I. I had exactly the same thing you do. When I saw this in theaters, I was like, that was garbage. Don't like that. Don't want to see that kind of thing again. And now I'm like, you know what? I'm not like, hooray, what a great thing. But I'm like, I'm a lot softer on it now. I'm like, you know what?
Yeah. The biggest misfire in the visuals for the opening titles for me is filtering it all through a diamond. So that's the one visual piece that we haven't commented on, is that the way that these visuals are mixed, we are seeing all of this refracted through a diamond, basically. So the images sort of like change into one another. And that's how they like tie the whole sequence together.
Yeah, there's like aberration at the edges of the image as the facets of the diamond. And there's an occasional motif that shows up a couple times of like the golden eye, the eye from the beginning of GoldenEye, where the iris is gold. And I don't know if that's meant to be like, because it gets like disintegrated at one point. I don't know if they're trying to be like, that bond is being broken or something. I don't know why that visual is here.
Yeah, it's not super clear to me why that visual is there either. Anyhow, I think the visuals for this are a mess. I think they have some good ideas that would have worked in a complete reconstruction of this opening, but what's here is just not good.
There are 2 wolves inside of this opening sequence. One wolf is trying to tell a story of a man being put through hell for 14 months, and the other wolf is trying to make it sexy with ladies.
Yeah.
Those wolves are fighting.
They are.
And now to the music.
Uh-huh.
The song is Die Another Day, written and performed by Madonna, and I don't like it.
It's very bad.
I am, like the opening title sequence itself, I am softer on it now than I was when I first saw this movie in theaters. I still really don't like it.
Yeah.
Not a fan of the overuse of autotune. This was 2002, and importantly, 2002 era Madonna.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the refrain of I guess I'll die another day. I don't like the lyrics of I guess. It's very non-committal.
Yeah.
I guess I'll die another day. Like I feel like it should be more definitive.
Yeah, I'm not crazy about the lyrics to this song at all.
No, I particularly don't like Hey Sigmund Freud, analyze this.
None of them are good. To the credit of the songwriter here, Die Another Day is not a lot to work with.
No.
They did not do the opening titles any favors by naming this movie Die Another Day.
The song could have been I live to die another day, or I'm going to die another day, not I guess I'll die another day.
Yep.
I live to die another day, I think, is a much stronger and fits the scansion of the existing lyrics. Look, Madonna's much better at music than I am, so please don't think I'm trying to lecture her on this. But my notes for this song, 18 years later, are maybe try and make it more definitive.
Make it less resigned. That's the thing, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I guess I'll die another day.
I guess I'll die another day. So in the context of like Bond having been captured and tortured, because this theme song is relevant in a couple of places in this movie, right? Like I get why this is what they went with in terms of how the story is written. But I guess it works in the context of Bond being tortured, where he's like, he's ready to die, but as a consequence of how things have worked out, he's just sort of along for the ride. And I guess today is not my day to go, but he's Bond. Give him some resolve. It does feel kind of like limp lyrically. The music is just like, I don't know, like this falls into what I would describe as a banger. This is a banger category song, but it is not one of the better ones. I don't even know how to describe it. It doesn't sound like a Bond theme to me at all. It's such a departure, and it doesn't even really feel like it's evoking the musical history of Bond at all for a movie that's so obsessed with evoking the history of Bond.
Yeah.
Because they do it in multiple different ways throughout the film. They do it in music cues throughout the movie. They do it in props. They do it in shot composition. They do it in scenario composition. All over the place, this movie is referencing the history of Bond, and this song is just so out of left field by comparison that it feels like a total aberration.
With minimal instrumental changes, this song will appear later in this movie being used as a club banger, and it fits very cleanly into that role.
Yeah.
For anyone who hasn't heard it, that's sort of where we're operating from. So we've been saying 14 months later because after the opening titles, we get a subtitle that tells us it is 14 months later. Bond now has long hair, an enormous beard. Looks like he's still wearing the same shirt. It is very dirty. It's full of holes. Bond is full of holes. He's bruised, bloody, beaten up. Among those shots in the opening titles was also one of him seemingly meditating, which will become relevant for a very silly thing that I had totally forgotten about that comes up shortly. General Moon comes in and you aren't sure if he's finally going to kill Bond for killing his son or whatever, but it's revealed that they never got any useful information out of him and they bundle him into a truck and take him away. And Bond's like, well, guess this is it then. And just to mess with him, they put him in front of another firing squad and tell him to walk. And there's a bridge that is just thick with fog and they tell him to walk across the bridge. And he's very confused and looks like he's about to die. And he starts to walk. And then the firing squad just leaves. They peace out. And he's like, what the heck is going on? He stops and is confused. And then he hears a British voice over this loudspeaker going, keep walking, please. And so he does. And then as he gets to the middle of the bridge and can see through the fog, he sees that he is part of a prisoner exchange. And the man coming the other direction is Zhao. And he stops to have a little exchange with Zhao.
Basically that I'll come for you. Don't count on your freedom. I'm coming to get you is essentially the gist of that conversation.
Yeah.
And Zhao is like, you won't live to see Korea unified under the North. And Bond is like, well, neither will you.
Now, Zhao at this point still has, 14 months later, his face pocked with diamonds, which would be the first thing that you would remove because they're on the surface. They're not big. It's not like a piece of shrapnel that's like buried way in there. You know, some people carry shrapnel for years and years and then eventually works its way out of the body, right?
Yeah.
These are on the surface. They're all visible.
Yeah.
The fact that they haven't just fallen out is astonishing. So it's just strange that they're still there.
We couldn't remove them without risk of damaging your brain.
How? Like, I get that they wanted to go for like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if there was a villain that just his face was like, you know, full of diamonds? And like, oh yeah, I guess it would be. So this is like a cosmetic thing that he's done. No, they just blew up and stuck in there and he never pulled them out and they never fell out. Like some of these look like a stiff wind would take them out.
Diamond face. He's the man. The man with a diamond face. An island face. Ba-da-da-da-da.
On the far side of the bridge, we see Robinson, played by Colin Salmon once again, and a man who we will discover is named Damien Falco. Or maybe we don't discover that in the movie, but the character's name is Damien Falco, played by Michael Madsen, who you will probably recognize from a whole bunch of stuff. He's been in, you know, every Tarantino movie under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
He plays kinda skeezy Americans.
He sure does, in this movie as well.
Yeah, exactly. He plays like no nonsense, kinda crappy asshole Americans is like his gimmick in movies. His IMDb page is longer than I could possibly get into, but again, you've seen him in all the Tarantino movies, Sin City, God, Donnie Brasco, so many things. Gosh, sorry. He has one of the longest IMDb pages of anyone I've looked at. The guy works, I'll say that.
Yeah, no doubt.
So Bond is excited to see them, or at least excited to see Robinson, and waves and is like, oh, hey. And then he's swarmed by a bunch of men in Tyvek suits who jab a needle into his arm and knock him out. And then we see him being examined by robots. Well, there's like digital scanning devices while we hear narration from doctors being like, oh, look at all this damage and look at all this. And boy, he put up with a whole lot over the 14 months. God, they really put the screws to him. No lasting damage to his internal organs. Well, his liver doesn't look great. Ah, that means it's him. And eventually, after that, he awakens in his hospital room as M arrives. And he realizes that he is on the far side of a piece of presumably armored glass. What's this? You don't trust me? You think I'm gonna hurt you? What's going on here? And M, the same M that we met in GoldenEye, I love this.
Mm-hmm.
She's immediately no nonsense. She's just like, well, if it was up to me, you'd still be in North Korea because your freedom came at too high a price.
She fully tells him, he was like, I would rather die than give up information. She's like, well, you had your cyanide. And Bond retorts, like, I threw it away years ago. But she is no holds barred. Like, why didn't you kill yourself?
Yeah.
You were captured. We can't trust you.
She does, however, let herself into his room, which shows that she at least trusts he's not gonna kill her, right?
Right.
She does fundamentally trust him as a person, but just obviously can't trust him as an agent.
Right.
And so the end result of this is Bond is burned. He's not useful to them because they don't know what he said, and he obviously isn't useful to the North Koreans anymore because they gave him back, so nobody wants him. He's not an active agent anymore.
And he gets reassigned to their evaluation center in the Falklands.
Luckily for Bond, he knows this one neat trick.
Doctors hate it.
They probably do.
Well, I mean, that one doctor sure does.
We look at Bond's EKG intercut with shots of the torture and him meditating in North Korea, and he appears to basically stop his heart, or at least slow his heart rate enough that the EKG reads him as going into cardiac arrest, which is a neat trick.
Yep.
So the doctors freak out and start to try to resuscitate him. And just before they're about to use the defibrillator, he turns his heart back on. There's like a shot of the EKG where his heart goes like 0 to 60 in 1.5 seconds. And he grabs both paddles of the defibrillator and electrocutes the two doctors, which is not how a defibrillator works. But he goes like, and they both go, and fall to the ground. And then he just sort of gets up, nods to the nurse, who gives him a look of like, ooh, and then excuses himself from the room. They're on a ship, by the way, and he lets himself up onto the top deck of the ship and jumps into the water and swims away. Swims clear across Hong Kong harbor, which is like also very impressive.
He walks into a ritzy hotel in Hong Kong. As he's walking in, he's wearing like pajamas, basically open. He hasn't buttoned up, so his like shirt is just open. They're sort of like surgical scrubs, but they're more like pajamas, basically. Of course, he's got a scraggly beard, which I went both ways over the course of watching the opening as to whether this is a legit beard that Pierce Brosnan actually grew, in which case Pierce Brosnan should never grow a beard, or if this is a makeup effect, because I wanted to come into this podcast and be like, yes, here's Pierce Brosnan with his totally real and not at all fake beard. But I'm not sure that it's actually like a prosthetic beard. It might just be his own, but it's not a good beard. I mean, I cannot speak from a position of authority here, because I also am incapable of growing a particularly robust beard, but I feel like I've got one up on the beard that Pierce Brosnan grew, if he did indeed grow this beard. So anyhow, he's looking all bedraggled and what have you as he walks through the lobby, barefooted, soaking wet, in his pajamas. The residents of the hotel are like, oh my, standards have really fallen these days, as they like scuttle around him as he makes his way through the lobby. And he walks up to the front desk and asks for his normal room. And the guy behind the desk is like, how will you be paying? Do you have a credit card? Do you have luggage, sir? The hotel manager comes up behind him and is like, Mr. Bond, and then tells the guy at the front desk to open the presidential suite. And he's like, yes, thank you. Could you have my tailor and, a bottle of Bollinger sent up to my room? And he goes up to his room. And so we then see a shot of like Bond having shaved and all cleaned up and looking like Bond.
There are 7 unopened packaged dress shirts.
So he's got like, he gets all his stuff now dressed in a nice shirt and cleaned up and what have you. And a woman comes to the door. She says, I'm a masseuse. I come compliments of the manager. Bond is like, I'm sure you do.
Her name is Peaceful Fountains of Desire.
She tells him to get on the bed, and he has other ideas, and he starts like coming on to her in what is actually like pretty skeezy. It reads really uncomfortable.
It does, until you realize that he has ulterior motives.
Yes, he does have ulterior motives. She says, I'm not that kind of a masseuse. And he says, well, I'm not that kind of a customer, as he proceeds to reach up her skirt and pull out a gun from a holster that she has on her thigh. He then picks up a ashtray off the side table and wings it through a mirror where the hotel manager and like 2 other guys are manning a camera and like surveillance equipment. And it turns out that the guy that Bond knew, the hotel manager that Bond knew, was like, did you think I didn't always know you were Chinese security? Come on. He's like, this is our turf now, Bond. Bond is like, well, I'm not here to take it from you. We're on the same side.
Because again, this is only a few years after the Hong Kong handover.
That's right. So now Bond, a British agent who like had been working in Hong Kong many times before, is now no longer welcome because he's British and Chinese secret intelligence has got their domain here now. But anyhow, Bond brings him up to speed as to sort of like what's going on and asks him for information. He's like, I'm looking for Zhao. I don't know where he is. He's destabilizing the region, and surely if you get me this information, I will get out of your hair.
Zhao had recently killed 3 Chinese delegates at an international conference, which is why he was arrested and why M didn't want to release him. But Zhao also wasn't giving up any information.
Right.
I don't know why whoever was responsible for this deal wanted Bond back, by the way.
That is answered in the conversation with M. The reason they took Bond out was because various things that have been happening in the intelligence community over that 14-month period where Bond was in prison. Towards the end of that, something happened that only Bond would know, and so they had concluded that Bond had cracked and was hemorrhaging information.
Right. Yes. Thank you. They did say that.
They pull Bond out because they're like, we cannot risk him continuing to give up state secrets, so we have to pull him out. And so they did. And of course, Bond hadn't. So Bond is like, no, somebody has set us up. We have a mole, somebody on the inside. The same person who set up those delegates and betrayed them is the person who set me me up that I took the fall for 14 months ago.
That's a big plot point that I also am not a huge fan of, is that he's obsessed with figuring out who it was who betrayed him originally, which is to say, who told Zhao that he was James Bond. And that doesn't have to be someone on the inside. That's the thing. It's like Zhao just took a picture of him and then someone was like, oh yeah, that's James Bond. Like that happened in View to a Kill.
Yeah.
People know who this guy looks like, but for some reason he immediately is like, I was set up. And it's like, no, they just took a picture of you and were like, oh, it's James Bond.
It ran it through the MI6 agent database that all evil organizations apparently have.
Yeah, but no, apparently you have to accept that somebody specifically did that to him, and whoever that person was is who was responsible for this because they wanted Zhao back. So Zhao has to be the connection.
It will turn out that there is such a person, but when we find out all the mechanics of that, it makes less sense than just running it through the imaging database that all evil organizations apparently share.
Yeah, it turns out that there is someone who set him up, but when he says, like, the person who set me up 14 months ago, I'm like, what do you mean, who set you up? Zhao did it. Zhao took a picture of you and figured out who you were. Like, what do you mean set up? Well, what the heck? Structurally, I have a lot of issues.
Absolutely. Moving right along, Chinese intelligence is like, actually, this seems like a win for us. Go take care of him.
Yeah, for just a fake passport and the cost of a plane ticket to Cuba, you can take care of this guy for us? Awesome.
Yeah, go to it. And so they send him to Cuba, and that's where we end up next.
Yeah, great shot of Havana, which of course is Spain. Because they could not shoot in Cuba.
Uh-huh.
So Bond wanders around Cuba and we meet a character that does not need to be in this movie. Bond goes into a factory where they are making cigars, and he goes up to the factory foreman and is like, I'm looking for the Delictados, which is a particular kind of cigar. And he's like, we don't make those anymore. And he's like, ask your boss. And so the guy phones up to his boss and he's like, some gringos here looking for Delictados. What? Okay. And it's like, he says, come on up. And so he goes up and meets this guy. This guy, by the way, is Raul, played by Emilio Echevarria. And they chat about these Delictado cigars in a very specific way. And it's a code phrase. And the guy sort of reveals that he's like a sleeper agent who just hasn't been activated in like years and years.
I do appreciate that Bond is like, sorry about the rude awakening.
Yeah. And the guy immediately is like, I love my country, right? He's like, please don't make me do anything bad to other Cubans. And Bond's like, no. Don't worry. It's not about Cuba. It's this Korean guy who's in Cuba and I got to take care of him. He's a terrorist. And the guy's like, well, one terrorist, another guy's freedom fighter. And Bond's like, trust me, this guy doesn't care about anybody's freedom. And the other guy's like, all right, sure. Tells him where to go, gives him a gun and a car and some binoculars and a book on birds, because Bond decided that his cover is going to be that he's a bird watcher. This is just from walking around this dude's office while he's on the phone, and he's like picks up a book of birds and picks up a thing of binoculars and a gun and is like, hey, can I borrow all of these? And the guy's like, yeah, all right, go for it. But like ultimately this scene does not need to be in this movie. Like Bond can just get these things himself. We could have just cut to Bond having these things.
Yes. The funny thing is, like, you're right, this is totally superfluous to the film, but the part of this movie that I think works the best and feels most like a Bond movie is the point from which Bond escapes the medical frigate to the point at which we are now. I like all of that quite a lot. That is all great. Bond bombing around in Cuba and like meeting up with an old contact and coming up with a cover story on the fly. That's all great. It works. It's gangbusters, even if it's totally unnecessary. And now we're about to head into a scene that I don't think is fondly of.
Bond is at an oceanside bar. There is a loud South African man being incredibly rude to the waitstaff.
Incredibly rude. He pulls a gun on him and threatens to blow his dong off.
Right, he does do that, yes. Okay, so I may have undersold it by saying incredibly rude.
He's like, you better do this or you will become Fidel Castrado, is his line.
This guy is credited as Creep.
My favorite part about why this guy is such a huge jerk is just to justify Bond's actions towards him later.
Yeah.
Because he's just a rando. He's not like a spy or anything. He's just, we have to present someone in a scene who's a huge, huge asshole so that the audience goes along with Bond later.
So Bond is using his binoculars to check out this fortress-looking thing out on an island. That's where Zhao is. There's some sort of beauty clinic out there. That's sort of all we know. And as he's looking around, he spots, coming out of the water, the character that we will know as Jinx, played by Halle Berry. And this goes back to your thesis about everything is over the top, right?
Yeah.
Because this is its 20th Bond movie. It's 40 years of the franchise. And this is meant to be the callback to Ursula Andress coming out of the water in her bikini in Dr. No.
Yep.
To the point that she's wearing a very similar bikini, complete with the belt with the knife on it.
Yeah.
Even though why Jinx's character has a knife is never explained.
And also they changed the color of the bathing suit.
Yes, hers is orange. I was talking also about some things are in slow motion, and every shot of Jinx is in slow motion, and every shot of Bond is normal speed, so it cuts back and forth between normal speed and slow motion, and it's very disorienting. So she comes out of the water where she was going for a swim and comes back up to where she left her towel, which is very near where Bond is standing. And more over the top, they engage in the most innuendo-laden conversation. There's a lot in this movie.
Thank you. Okay, so I was going to use the exact phrase, this is the most innuendo-laden conversation I've seen in a Bond film yet.
Yeah.
Verbatim. You read my mind.
And every exchange between these characters is just like tripping over themselves to one-up each other on innuendo. And it's like, did you just record every idea you had and then decide you were going to choose which ones landed well in editing and then accidentally keep all of them?
But I think my favorite line out of all of them, my favorite single line from this exchange, because I agree, the exchange goes way over the top, but my favorite single line is Bond casually throwing it. It's like, I'm just here to watch the birds.
That's good.
As he was like obviously staring at her through the binoculars, right? Like, that's a good one.
The most over the top and least defensible is where he says that he's an ornithologist, and then she looks at his groin and says, wow, that's a mouthful. Meant to imply that she means the word ornithologist is a mouthful of a word, except that there's no way that you could interpret it any other way. It's just like every single line back and forth is just like, I don't mind quips and innuendo, but this was just like, this is silly.
Oh yeah, they just layer it on.
It's like, you two just need to get a room, and then they do immediately.
And then they do. Yeah, they waste no time leaping into bed.
Yeah, just boom, instantly, both of them in bed. It's like, what the what?
And like, I guess it will come to make sense eventually why they might do that as we learn more about Jinx's character and who she is and what her role in the film is. But no, it is very abrupt.
I don't think it does. Once we find out who she is and what her role in the film is, I don't think that makes this make any more sense. Because she doesn't know who Bond is at this point.
Yeah, but that's never stopped Bond before.
True. Look, two consenting adults, if they want to do this, that's super fine. It's just like, it's so abrupt and comical to the point that like this woman gets out of the water and Bond just starts throwing profound innuendos at her, and she's like, sounds great, let's sex.
So, like, maybe it's apocryphal, but my understanding is that this movie was working to establish Jinx as a spin-off series.
I don't believe the goal of this movie was to establish Jinx as a spin-off, but that based on how this turned out, they wanted to do Jinx as a spin-off. And in fact, Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli were very keen to do that. They also wanted to do a spin-off with Michelle Yeoh's character from Tomorrow Never Dies.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but in this case, MGM United Artists was like, no, we're not doing that. Please just make Casino Royale.
Yeah.
Which apparently Broccoli and Wilson were upset about. They really wanted to do that.
Well, good on MGM.
I guess, okay, let's talk a little bit about Halle Berry. Ups and downs for her career, I think, is what we could say of Halle Berry. She won her Oscar for Monsters Ball during principal photography of this movie.
Right.
There's a really entertaining moment in some of the behind the scenes features where two people involved in Die Another Day won Oscars that same night. One was Halle Berry and one was a sound recordist for his work on a Ridley Scott movie. And she presented him with the Oscar. So they had a fun backstage moment. But yeah, Halle Berry, is it safe to say that her breakout movie role was X-Men? Probably.
Maybe. Now, I don't know Halle Berry's full...
I'm looking at her IMDb page. She had certainly been in a lot of things, but then you get up to the year 2000 and you get X-Men, Swordfish, Monsters Ball, Die Another Day, X-Men 2. Then you get Gothica, and then you get Catwoman. And then you get X-Men The Last Stand, and then Cloud Atlas. And then Days of Future Past.
Yeah.
And then a TV series called Extant. She's in John Wick Chapter 3. She's in Kingsman: The Golden Circle.
Yeah.
But yeah, 2000, 2002, Halle Berry, very hot commodity in Hollywood. They were very, very excited to get her in this movie. And just like everything else, I think she's too over the top. To me, she has the same problem as Christmas Jones in The World Is Not Enough, in that she's trying so hard to be cool.
Yeah. I don't know. I have a very tenuous relationship with Halle Berry in film anyhow, because she fills that niche of performers that I have a real hard time seeing past the actor to the part. Even in John Wick Chapter 3, which I love the John Wick movies, I find her performance really tough to buy. She has exactly the same delivery and presence in every film, and it pulls me out of it. Like, her presence in the X-Men movies she's not Storm, she's Halle Berry playing Storm. And she has the same problem in this movie. She's not Jinx, she's Halle Berry playing Jinx. I don't know, she does not work for me very well in this movie. And it part of it might just be that she's too big. You're right. She's a hot commodity at the time this movie came out. She's just sort of broken out to the extent that within our knowledge of the cultural oeuvre at the time. And often, historically, the Bond girls are not typically huge breakout stars. They are typically unknowns or models or whatever, for better and worse in the past. But in this case, it just really feels like she's out of place, and she's not given a lot to work with.
No, she does have the worst line of dialogue in the entire movie.
Like X-Men.
That's also true. Yeah. Now, I do want to be clear that I'm aware that we previously said Joe Don Baker always plays himself in movies. And that I love that about Jack Wade. I love the character of Jack Wade. But I agree with you that is a very similar criticism for Halle Berry here. It's different when it's the lead co-star. For me, I don't have quite that same problem. For me, it's just the try-hard aspect. It's just, I don't get the impression that she is effortless and cool. I get the impression that she is trying to appear effortless and cool.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'll throw myself under my own bus of inconsistency here, because for instance, I adore the Mission Impossible movies, and Tom Cruise cannot play anyone but Tom Cruise.
No, he is very good at playing Tom Cruise.
But I don't care, because I'm there to see Tom Cruise hang off the side of a plane.
Right.
And the fact that it's still Tom Cruise doesn't bother me in that context, but it's a hurdle I can't get over in the case of this film. I agree with you. It feels like she's trying very hard to be effortless and cool, and that is not effortless and cool.
In the morning, in the movie, after their evening of what I assume was rampant lovemaking.
You don't have to assume.
After what is probably the longest dry spell James Bond has had since his awakening. He awakens in the more traditional sense and finds that Jinx is not in the bed, and looks out the window with his binoculars and sees that she is waiting to get onto a boat to head out to that spa retreat place, and sees the tickets that she has to get on the boat. So he finds a wheelchair, goes and knocks on the hotel room door of the man credited as Creep, knocks him out.
I think he fully kills him. Because how long does this dude stay unconscious for? Like, I was thinking about this as I'm watching the film. Like, he cold clocks him coming in the door, and the guy just goes down. And then he's unconscious as he loads him into the wheelchair. And then however long the journey on the boat is. And then the dude is still out cold while he's wheeling around the halls of this facility. It's gotta be, like, dude's gotta have been out for like 45 minutes at that point.
That's probably not good for your brain.
No.
I like that the woman that he has hired to share an evening with him, it is implied, does not care. Bond walks into the room and goes like, good morning. And she's like, hey. He says, buenos dios. And she says, hola. But yeah, they're just like, what's up? And he's like, no problem. She's like, all right, whatever.
Yeah.
And he also happens to have one of these tickets. Lucky. So yeah, Bond loads this guy into the wheelchair and then uses him as the cover to get on the next ferry over to Isla Los Organos, or I assume, I don't know, the Island of Organs?
Sure.
Bond lets himself into the clinic because he's pushing an unconscious guy in a wheelchair, and then also uses him as a distraction. He just sort of pushes the dude in the wheelchair, just like, whoom, and the guy runs into a wall and falls out of the wheelchair, which allows Bond the opportunity to like sneak around the side of a security checkpoint and comes in through a window in someone's room where, again, the Cuban family in the room just doesn't care. He just comes in through the window, steals one of their grapes, and is like, hey, and they're all like, hi. Nobody seems to care what this British guy is doing, which I kind of like.
Yeah.
So he wanders around the facility and he finds a room where there is a security camera pointing at a wall. Just a wall. It's a dead end with a camera pointing at a wall. He's like, well, that's weird. So he sneaks up, unplugs the camera, and then does a great job of not immediately seeing the very obvious secret button in the wall. So good job, Brosnan, on making it apparent that you wouldn't see that immediately, but he presses the button and goes into the secret part of the facility. There's like a hall of mirrors and whatever.
Why is this hall here?
I don't know. For fun.
It doesn't do anything in the film.
Look, why can't probable ex-Nazi eugenicists have a bit of architectural levity?
All right, fair enough. Probable ex-Nazi eugenicists can have little and architectural levity as a treat.
Well, that's good. So we see Dr. Alvarez talking to Jinx now. Dr. Alvarez, played by Simon Andrew, who's been in a bunch of stuff like Chronicles of Narnia, Bridget Jones's Diary, and they're having a talk about this procedure.
They're going to kill off all her bone marrow, then they're going to harvest new bone marrow to put in her, and they will take it from people who will not be missed, like orphans and homeless people. And she hands him a check.
He thinks of himself as being very noble doing this, that is like giving purpose to these people who would otherwise be a leech upon society. He's like, aren't I great and clever?
Yes. There is a good exchange between them as he comments on what an artist he is. And she's like, well, like all great artists, you're best appreciated after you're dead. And she stands up and shoots him twice in the chest.
When we eventually find out who Jinx is, this makes so much less sense. So she starts burning the record of her being there, like the headshot and whatever that the doctor was working on, as Bond is sneaking around. And Bond eventually finds Zhao near an MRI machine, but in this like funky multicolor rainbow fiber optic head cylinder with this voice talking German in the background. And while that's happening, we see Jinx looking at the doctor's computer, and we see this thing indicating that they are turning Zhao into a different person, that they're doing what we will find out very shortly is called gene therapy to completely change Zhao's genetic makeup so that he looks like a completely different person. And phase 1, it shows what he looks like, and then it shows what he will look like, which looks like, I don't know, a member of a boy band. And like, it looks like he's also taking like 10 years off this guy. He's partway through phase 1, which is to say that his face is a slightly different shape, all his hair is gone, and all the pigment is gone from his skin and eyes. That's where he's at currently. And that's where he will stay because Bond pulls him out of the machine. Now, in the after picture, he doesn't have the diamonds in his face. But here, at the midpoint of the gene therapy, he still has the diamonds in his face. When were they planning to remove those?
When the diamond gene gets altered.
I have to assume that, like, step 1 would be, let's pull those very conspicuous diamonds out of your face.
You would think.
Look, there's a lot of stuff in this movie that, like, if it was the only thing in a different Bond movie, we'd be like, well, that's kind of silly, but okay. But there's just so much all at once constantly in this movie that it's like, what is happening?
Yeah. No, you're not wrong. Like, diamond face villain is in isolation not a problem.
Yeah. So Bond questions Zhao by squeezing on his IV bag and is like, who betrayed me? Who's the person on the inside? But Zhao is superhuman. He's the heavy. And so they get into a fight and just start ruining a bunch of stuff in this room. During the fight, Bond grabs a necklace with a bullet casing that Zhao is wearing, and the MRI machine gets turned on, which of course is a huge magnet. So like the gun and knives and everything that they're both using get sucked out of their hands and stuck to the MRI machine. Bond manages to grab his gun back. Jinx is setting a bomb to go off in the doctor's filing cabinet, which is a problem when Bond chases Zhao into the doctor's office, Zhao jumping out the window of the doctor's office, and then before Bond can follow him, that bomb going off. Bond notices that the fire that Jinx set didn't take, and so her face is still clearly visible, and he's like, wait a minute, that's Jinx's face, and that's a dead doctor. That's weird.
She did a very bad job of burning the evidence. Nobody must know I was here. I'll set the flame at the bottom of the page, nowhere near my photo.
And just assume that's all gonna be fine. She runs outside and sees Zhao running for a helicopter, so she pursues and takes a bunch of shots at him and misses. Bond uses a compressed gas canister to burst out of a wall, and they both start chasing the helicopter. She's doing a lot of like running full tilt with her gun fully extended in front of her, which has to be terrible for aim, and she misses completely. They're up at the top of the wall of this fortress on the island, and two guys with guns corner Jinx. So she puts her hands up. She slowly puts her gun down. Then she takes off her dress, and the guys are like, well, what's going on? And she's wearing a bikini. Then she looks over at Bond and gives him like a gives him like a look, and then in a very awkward visual effect shot, falls backwards off the cliff into the water like some 100 feet below where there's a boat waiting, climbs into the boat, makes like a salute gesture at Bond, and the boat drives away. And then Bond, who is also standing right beside these guys, also with a gun in his hand, is completely ignored by these men as they run off in the other direction. How did they not see him?
I think Jinx caused enough of a distraction that they didn't realize that Bond was also doing a thing. How they could not, considering Bond was where the explosion was, chasing a patient through the facility.
He's holding a gun.
With a gun is anyone's guess, but I guess they felt like they had bigger fish to fry.
They don't even look at him. She drives off one direction and they start running the other direction, like away from him. This allows Bond a moment to inspect the thing that he stole from Zhao, which is the bullet casing, which has a screw top, and inside are diamonds. So then we cut back to Raoul's office, and they're inspecting the diamonds with a loupe. I'm not sure exactly what tests he did to confirm this, but he says that they are chemically identical to African conflict diamonds, and Bond notices that there's a laser mark etched into one of them.
These diamonds are made of carbon, just like African conflict diamonds.
There is also that issue. Yep.
I assume that there are trace elements that identify where they come from. I had to make the joke.
No, absolutely. Raoul says this symbol is a GG, which means it is the Graves Corporation run by Gustav Graves, that being the GG. That means that these are from his diamond mine in Iceland. Bond thinks it's curious that those diamonds are the same as African conflict diamonds. Interesting.
How could the Icelandic diamonds be made of carbon?
Back at MI6, Moneypenny is listening in to M being yelled at by Damien Falco, who's annoyed that Bond escaped. And she's like, what, you think I just let the door open for him? Like, he did what he's trained to do. He's a super spy. We trained him well. Sorry, I guess.
I mean, the North Koreans were able to keep him penned in a mud brick building for 14 months. M was unable to keep Bond in a bulletproof room on a naval ship for 14 minutes. With all the technology of the British government at her disposal. I'm on Falco's side here.
Yeah, right. You got it. You got me. Fair enough. And where is Bond right now? Well, he's on a British Airways flight in first class heading back to England. And we know that he's heading to England because The Clash's London Calling is playing. We have still managed to avoid the opening bars of Rule Britannia, but we have not avoided London Calling. As he is sitting on the plane and quipping to the flight attendant that he's glad he asked for his martini to be shaken because it is turbulent and haha, He is reading High Life magazine, which luckily, which I assume is the British Airways magazine, it luckily has a feature on Gustav Graves, the subheading of which is "The fast-living, skydiving, car racing, rapier-wielding gem tycoon tells Greg Wilson why he'll sleep when he's dead."
Diamonds are forever extreme.
So outside Buckingham Palace, there's a group of reporters waiting, and then we see a man jump out of a helicopter and deploy a Union Jack parachute, which I assume everyone in London who saw this happen while they were filming must have thought that that was Bond.
Oh, almost certainly.
But no, in fact, this is Gustav Graves, who lands rather ostentatiously right outside Buckingham Palace. He lands and just starts walking. Like, he doesn't miss a stride and starts uncoupling his parachute and just continues to walk while he gets swarmed with reporters asking him a whole bunch of questions. It's time for a very handy exposition dump. I do not mind this, by the way. Reporter question period as exposition dump is great. Nobody asks him if he's Colombian, so the questions are at least on topic. It turns out he is being knighted today, so that's very exciting. The specific question that he's asked is, "Will you be using your new title, Mr. Graves?" And Graves responds, "Oh, you know me, I love my adopted nation, but I'd never stand on ceremony." So Gustav Graves is from Argentina, which is not part of the Commonwealth. And while non-Commonwealth citizens can be given an honorary knighthood, they explicitly aren't allowed to use Sir or Dame, but they can append KBE, which is Knight of the British Empire, to their name. So like Bono, because he's from Ireland.
Right.
Steven Spielberg was knighted.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't know that either. But he can't be Sir Steven Spielberg. So he's Steven Spielberg KBE, if he so desires. But I don't think that comes up. So presumably, by adopted nation, what Graves means here is that he is a British citizen now. Terry Wogan, who's a BBC personality from Ireland, was knighted and then later became a British citizen. So then he was able to start calling himself Sir Terry Wogan. Anyway, I find the Order of the British Empire fascinating. So what else do we learn about Gustav Graves here? He doesn't sleep, doesn't need sleep, or chooses not to sleep is not really clear in this moment. As it turns out, he literally can't sleep, and he's working on something very fancy. You know, they're like, "What's this secret that you're going to be unveiling at the conference in Iceland?" And I do like this. He's like, "It's not a secret, it's a surprise, and you'll all find out at the same time." And this guy, just what a smarmy face this guy. He's just like, you know, like he's,
Oh, yeah.
You wouldn't know that he's not like descended from landed gentry in the UK, this guy.
I mean, I feel a little bad saying this for the actor himself, but Gustav Graves rates high on the list of punchable faces.
Oh, he really does. The actor, Toby Stephens, does not otherwise necessarily seem to have that from other roles of his that I've seen.
Okay, he's just putting it on.
Yeah.
Credit to him, he's doing a great job.
Toby Stephens has done a bunch of other things. That comes up for basically everyone that I say. He played Captain Flint in 38 episodes of Black Sails. I don't know if you ever saw Black Sails. He was also in the Netflix Lost in Space as John Robinson.
Yeah.
Since the last time this came up, have you watched it yet?
No, I haven't.
Me neither.
I still want to. When do I have time to watch anything other than James Bond movies these days?
No kidding.
The thing that catches me from his IMDb history,
Oh, I'm glad you noticed,
is that he also plays the voice of James Bond in the radio play versions of all of the Bond stories.
and has done for 12 years. The first one that he did was Dr. No in 2008, and he's done one almost every other year, if not every year, since then. And these are official, I think they're BBC Radio 4. These are official adaptations of the Fleming novels into a radio play.
Right.
Meaning that he might end up being the actor who has portrayed James Bond in an official production for the longest time.
I think he already is, isn't he? 2008 to 2020 is 12 years.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It's funny because later his character will talk about taking a lot of inspiration from Bond himself. And I just think that's kind of funny that it's like,
Yeah,
I guess he plays James Bond. All right. At the end of the scene, the reporters are sort of corralled by his assistant, Miranda Frost, who's like, "Okay, that's all the time we have. You must understand, don't want to keep the queen waiting. Goodbye, everybody." And then we cut to a fencing club called Blades, where Bond walks in dressed to have a fencing. And it's been established that Graves fences. And Bond walks in, and the only person in the room wearing black is in front of him. And this is a character by the name of Verity, played by Madonna.
So we previously called out the first and only instance of the performer of the theme song for a Bond film appearing in the title sequence for that film. Does this in fact mark the first and only instance of the performer of the title song for a film appearing in the film itself?
As far as I'm aware, although they did ask the lead singer of Aha to do it. But he declined because he felt that they weren't asking him for his acting ability. They were only asking him because he was famous. Which is like, yeah, dude, that's exactly why.
Yes, very good skills of deduction there.
Yeah. There's so much trivia for these shows, and I may be forgetting a cameo or something, but certainly not like a named supporting character like this, who exists only to be exposition in a way that I don't like, converse to the reporter thing, because Bond introduces himself and goes, "You must be Verity. I'm your fencing lesson for the afternoon." And then she starts talking to him like she's a contact. Like she just starts volunteering a ton of information about Graves really casually.
Right.
And it's just kind of odd, like a little unnatural how it comes across. She asks Bond to tighten up her fencing corset. She points out the best fencer in the club. Bond goes, "Oh, it must be Graves." And she says, no, it's his assistant, Miranda Frost, who won the gold at the Sydney Olympics. Bond says, "Yeah, by default, if I remember." And she says, "Well, the person who won gold at the games OD'd on steroids, so she earned that gold." Miranda Frost, by the way, this is the motion picture debut of Rosamund Pike.
Really?
I was surprised too.
Wow.
I thought for sure she'd been in other things before this, but no, only some TV roles.
Fascinating.
Yeah. She would later receive an Emmy and an Oscar nomination for her role in Gone Girl.
Yeah.
She was also in Johnny English Reborn, which is kind of funny. By the way, of every new actor in this movie, Rosamund Pike is the best.
Oh, yeah.
She's great in this role.
Yeah. I mean, she's basically great in everything. Very, very good actress. I had no idea this was her first cinematic role.
Yeah. She was also in the Goldfinger radio play with Toby Stephens as the voice of Pussy Galore.
There you go.
And since you mentioned Tom Cruise, she was in Jack Reacher.
Recently watched Jack Reacher for the first time, and it was a pretty good movie that you should watch.
All right. Verity says that Graves only plays for money, and he's good enough and rich enough to the point that he doesn't care about money, that nobody wants to fence him because they'd probably lose and it'd be a waste of their money. And if Graves loses, he doesn't care because he's got all this money. And then she asks Bond if he'd like to meet him. And Bond's like, "Oh yeah, absolutely." So she goes over and introduces them, and he says, "I'm Bond, James Bond." And Graves is like, "Have we met before?" And Bond is like, "No, I would remember." And Graves is like, "Ah, yes, no, of course you would. Hey, would you like to spar? What do you say, 1,000 pounds a point?" Bond is like, "Sure." Graves asks Verity if she'd like to place a side bet, and she says, rather unconvincingly, "No, I don't like cockfights," and walks out of the movie. I didn't especially care for Madonna's line delivery, if I'm honest.
Yeah. This is where I want to make a joke. It's like, maybe they should have cast that cameo for acting ability, but Madonna acts.
Yeah.
She's been in movies.
The movies that she's been in have also had like ups and downs, but she can do good work. And it's just, again, she's got basically nothing to work with here, that it's just like dispense a bunch of information to Bond and leave.
Yeah.
But also it's just kind of like playing it too cool, I guess.
Her role in this film doesn't make sense because Bond shows up with an appointment. Be like, "You are going to be my fencing coach. I have a fencing lesson scheduled with you." That's his reason for being there. And then he ditches the lesson to go fight Graves, and she just leaves.
It's just stunt casting. It's just like, oh, and Madonna's in this movie. Like, again, this is 2002, so this is not super long after the release of her album Music. So this is, I don't know, her third or fourth staggeringly impressive comeback.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just like, hey, check it out. Madonna's in the movie. Huh? It should be mentioned that this movie was released a month after the notoriously bad Swept Away, starring Madonna and directed by her then husband Guy Ritchie.
I see. I don't think I know that movie or its notoriety.
Oh, it was
a very bad movie that I should not watch.
It won the Golden Raspberry that year for worst director.
Huh.
Yeah, and that's Guy Ritchie.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting.
Like, he made Lock, Stock, Snatch, and then this absolute turd with Madonna. And then eventually recovered, but like, oh, new Guy Ritchie movie, sweet. And it was Swept Away. And it was very, very bad. Currently holds a 5% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Woof. Wow.
Yeah. It made $598,000 in the US.
That's not a lot of dollars.
No.
I'm like doing the math. I'm like, wait a second. It's like $1,000 a screen.
Of the not Die Another Day movies that we have recommended you watch this episode, that's not one of them. But back to Die Another Day, where now is a ridiculous sword fight. They do normal fencing, and Graves wins. And he's like, you want to play more? You want to, I don't know, up the bets? And Bond's like, sure, we play for this, and shows him one of the diamonds. Because you know Bond, he's always like, just going to drive directly at the problem.
They lampshade that in this movie.
They do, which I like, actually. It's one of the things I quite like in this movie, is that they point out about how that's just a thing that Bond does, and he's very good at it.
He confronts and provokes.
Yeah.
He is a blunt instrument.
He catches Graves and inadvertently draws blood, or maybe on purpose draws blood, which upsets Graves immensely, who then says, all right, hang on, if we're going to do this, let's do this. Let's play this, the old ways, or whatever. I don't know what rule set they're supposedly using, but he says it's the winner is the first man who draws blood from the other's torso. And pulls two, what I would have assumed were decorative swords off the wall, but are apparently very well sharpened. And they have this absolute barnstormer of a sword fight all up in and around this club, this like opulent London sword fighting club. Notable things ruined are the painting of Blue Boy just slashed through. A suit of armor gets knocked over, and just lots of broken glass and stuff toppled, and it's just ridiculous.
They go through a variety of different swords as well, because they start with like the rapiers, and then they like lose those. Graves pulls out a katana and like cuts Bond's sword in half, and then they go for like claymores or like big two-handers and are like going at each other with those. It stops being a fencing match and starts being like knock down, drag out, whatever you can find fight. It's very absurd. It's very silly.
It's entertaining.
It's not my least favorite set of stunts in the movie. It's quite entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
It's relatively fitting for a Bond movie. It sort of calls back to the fight with the kendo guy in Moonraker a little bit, in it's the same sort of like, we're just wrecking everything around us as we fight our way through priceless art and history. But I think the thing that I like most about it is that it's two people doing a thing, and there's no apparent like CG or effects shots. It's just two people with swords fighting each other in fun and interesting ways that have lots of reversals and twists and turns in the narrative of the fight. And like that, I like. That's good.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I got no problems with this fight. It ends when Bond does eventually draw blood from Graves' torso in what looks like it has to be a really painful wound, but evidently is not. It doesn't come up again. It looks like they're going to continue fighting after that, but Miranda breaks it up and is like, okay, you're both bleeding profusely. Like, we'd stop. And then Graves is like, oh, it's just a bit of fun, Miranda. Trying to like completely play it off like he wasn't just out for blood moments prior.
Let's go settle this in the office upstairs.
Yeah, comedy shot of various workers from the club carrying all of the broken furniture out of the lobby while Bond has a check written for him, and Graves invites him to Iceland to see this amazing thing that he's showing off, and says, Miranda, you can set all that up. And she's like, yeah, once they've finished smoothing things over with the club, sure. After which a porter walks in and hands Bond an envelope and sort of comments, place need redecorating anyway. And inside the envelope is a big old-timey key. And then we cut to the bridge right by Big Ben, or the tower that Big Ben resides within, if you wish to be that person. And if you do, good on you. So do I.
Before we carry on,
yes,
since we're in the realm of issuing corrections anyhow, previously in this episode, I commented that Toby Stephens might already be the longest serving Bond. I have now looked it up, and he is not.
Is it? It's still Roger Moore, isn't it?
No.
Oh, wait, no, it's Daniel Craig, because it's been so long between movies.
Yeah. Daniel Craig, as of 2021, with the release of No Time to Die, will have been in the role for 15 years, and Roger Moore was in the role for 12.
Okay. Well, Toby Stephens has many other Fleming novels that he could potentially be in adaptations of, because they're still doing them. The most recent one was 2020.
So you were initially correct when you said he could be, but then I was wrong when I said he already was.
Well, I appreciate the mid-podcast correction.
That's right. The commenters that have already commented to correct me will now be hoisted by their own petard as they find that I have corrected myself.
Haha.
And I'm sure they will issue self-correcting corrections to their own corrective comments.
Yeah, I want to make sure you all go edit your comment. Thank you. Now, Bond walks across the bridge and uses that key to let himself into this little door, which is a real door that exists there that's used for maintenance, and apparently people who have to work in there get really irritated when Bond fans come and knock on the door. And he lets himself down to an abandoned London tube station where M is waiting, and Bond sort of comments, he's like, "I've heard about this place, an abandoned place for abandoned agents. Never thought I'd find myself here." Which is just kind of a weird, what is this place then? What do you mean an abandoned place for abandoned agents? Is this where MI6 makes agents disappear permanently? What does he mean by that?
For agents off book, for burned agents that they no longer officially condone. Clearly, because that's how they use it in the context of the film. So I'm extrapolating from this, but it is if you are burned and disavowed and can no longer be kept above board, but you still serve a black ops purpose, an unofficial service to the crown, this is where you would meet. What I want to know, how long has M been waiting here?
I was wondering that myself, because she's standing right there.
Does she have nothing better to do than stand there in an empty tube station until Bond arrives? How did she know what time he planned to show up?
I assume that she and Q were in the next room watching on cameras and going oh, he's coming, quick, go, get in position.
She ran from her field office desk in the other room that we just didn't get to see in this film.
Yeah. There's some dialogue in here that's very sounds cool, but is ultimately meaningless, because she asks him, all right, what do you have on Graves? And he's like, what, you burned me and now you want my help? And she's like, yeah. He says critically of her, you'll do whatever it takes to get the job done. And she says, yes, just like you. And he says, except I won't compromise. She replies, I don't have the luxury of looking at things in black and white. While you were away, the world changed. To which he responds, well, not to me. And none of that means anything.
Yeah. In the context of the release of this film, the 14 months Bond was away would have included the September 11th attack.
Yes. There is a theory that the reason that he was in North Korea for 14 months is an excuse for why it's the Superman question, right? It's why wouldn't James Bond have stopped 9/11? Well, he was in a North Korean prison at the time.
Right.
Which I don't actually think is a question you need answering in universe, but carry on.
Yeah, I mean, for all we know, that didn't actually happen in universe. I assume that's what they're alluding to, right? The whole world has changed. Warfare is different. The geopolitical structure of nations and how they relate to each other is different now. But it has absolutely no bearing whatsoever on the plot of this film.
No, it doesn't. And I assume that then he is saying, well, it doesn't look any different to me, which I'll tell you, James, is not the case.
Yeah.
The world post 9/11 is very different. And if you can't see that yet, well, stay tuned. Anyway, Bond correctly surmises that she must be suspicious of Graves in some way, or else he wouldn't be standing there. And we find out a little bit more about Graves here. He was an orphan in Argentina working in the mines, and he learned how to do engineering
by working in the mines.
It's not necessarily explained. He founded the Graves Corporation and discovered a diamond mine, discovered diamonds in Iceland, made a mine there, made himself a huge fortune, gave half of that fortune to charity, which is why he got knighted, just for the massive philanthropy of discovering this hitherto unknown cache of diamonds and giving away half the profit.
Right.
I have a lot of questions about that, but we'll come back to that when it becomes relevant to the story. Bond shows M the diamonds that he got from Zhao and says that he thinks Graves' whole setup is a way of laundering blood diamonds. I don't understand how Bond's friend from Cuba was the first person to look at one of Graves' diamonds and go, yo, this looks like a conflict diamond.
It's made of carbon.
God damn it. I don't understand how no one else came to the same conclusion that Raoul did.
You raise a good point.
So she says, well, you're going to go to Iceland. You're back on the case. So then we cut to Bond back in his office. We get to see his office at MI6. He is cleaning his gun and he hears gunshots and he comes out and finds Moneypenny shot in the head and many other MI6 employees dead and the building swarming with baddies. And he finds Robinson and they go through clearing the room, and then Robinson gets killed, and then they find M held at gunpoint, and Bond manages to save M by shooting the man who's holding her at gunpoint, and then the whole scene freezes and John Cleese appears through it, sort of CG-like, because this is like a VR training simulator that Bond is participating in, which is also very needless and over the top.
Yeah, let me tell you how much I hate that. Because it's a lot.
It's just such a random, needless fake out in the middle of the movie.
Yeah, it's a training exercise. But what if it's not a training exercise? What if it's a VR training exercise?
Don't like it.
Don't like it. I don't like it. Straight up. Also, he doesn't shoot the guy that's holding M at gunpoint. He shoots M and then shoots the guy that's holding M at gunpoint, which Q, as played by John Cleese, notes, generally one doesn't shoot their own boss. He's like, I think you'll find she has a flesh wound and he's dead.
So now we get the Q scene. As we mentioned last episode, Desmond Llewellyn sadly passed away very soon after the release of The World Is Not Enough. And so now John Cleese's character, previously credited as R, has ascended to full Q status. And I like his character a lot more in this movie than I did in the last movie, because in the last movie, he was just playing John Cleese in a Monty Python sketch, whereas here he's actually like doing more sort of Q stuff.
Yes, although he still does the bit. You commented that like the left arm goes in the left armhole thus, and the right arm goes in the right armhole thus. He does that with the sensor ring.
Yeah.
Like the way he shows it is still very much doing that bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, he is in a Q role now. He's not being John Cleese. He's being Q.
Mm-hmm. Also down here is just a whole bunch of props from previous Bond films. There's the little robot dog from View to a Kill. There's the wings of the plane from Octopussy. There's the crocodile from Octopussy. There's the jetpack from Moonraker. Bond comments, so this is where we keep all the old relics, and Q shoots him a rude glance. It's just like, spot the prop, basically.
Yep.
One of the new things that Q shows off, as you mentioned, is a ring that can shatter bulletproof glass by using ultrasonic waves, which is neat. They go to show off the car for the movie. No longer the BMW. They only had a 3-picture deal. We are back to the Aston Martin. Not that you can see it, because as Q quips, Aston Martin calls it the Vanquish. We call it the Vanish, because it has adaptive camouflage in that it functionally looks completely invisible.
We've had Gadget Car.
Yeah.
What if we had Invisible Gadget Car?
Is this too science fiction for you?
A little bit. It's too silly. Yeah, I guess that's my complaint, is that it is too science fiction. And it's funny because like I'm willing to give a lot of leeway on science fiction gadgets in these movies. We had a laser battle in space and that was rad. But Invisible Car is too much.
Yeah.
The rest of the car is awesome. I have no problem with anything else about this car. The rest of this car rules. I want this car.
I do appreciate Q's line when Bond says that he's joking, and Q says, as I learned from my predecessor, I never joke about my work. So I enjoyed that at least.
My favorite exchange around the car, after Q gives Bond the full rundown of like, it's got torpedoes and missiles and an ejector seat and a retractable roof and this, that, and the other thing. Also, it has dual auto-targeting shotguns on the front end. Here's the manual. You should be able to shoot through that in a few hours. Bond just wings it out in front of the car as the shotguns take aim at the moving thing and blow it out of the sky. He's like, oh, it only took a few seconds, Q. And he gets a withering look in response as the book is just confetti. Bond's delivery of it, or Brosnan's delivery of it, is great. The smug look on his face when he says, oh, it just took a few seconds, Q, is perfect.
I'm kind of bummed that this is the only time that John Cleese got to really do the full Q scene, because I kind of dig him in this role.
Yeah, he works. If John Cleese not getting to do Q again is the price we had to pay to get Casino Royale. Spoilers for my opinion of Casino Royale. That is a sacrifice I am willing to make on the altar of Casino Royale.
Yeah, no, I'm totally fine with that. I'm curious if they'll have a more traditional Q scene in the new movie.
The trailer, particularly trailer 2, would seem to indicate that yes, because he's in the trailer, and the situation that is shown in the trailer seems to be veering in that direction. But also just there are like gadgets and gadgety vehicles in the trailer. I don't know. I dare not get my hopes up. I mean, I dare not get my hopes up. Who am I kidding? We're doing a 26 episode podcast in anticipation of this film. Like, one of the things I've really, really wanted from the Daniel Craig era Bond movies is like, put Daniel Craig in a standard Bond film and let him go ham. Now I'm getting ahead of ourselves, but like the franchise spends the first 3 movies like building towards it's like, okay, now each one ends with like, all right, the status quo is now ready for Bond to be a Bond. Like Casino Royale ends like the status quo is good to go, and Quantum ends it's like the status quo, Bond is ready to be Bond now, and then Skyfall's like, no, actually Bond is ready to be Bond now, and then Spectre squanders it. And I want Daniel Craig to play a classical Bond for one film before he quits. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
It does look like it's going that way based purely on the trailers, but we'll see. Back in this movie that we're obliged to continue plotting through, up in M's office, there's a knock at the door, and she says, good, now, before you head up to Iceland. And then we get the reverse shot, and it's Miranda Frost. Miranda Frost is actually an MI6 agent, and M has chosen not to tell Bond. So that's interesting.
It is interesting. And this is where we get that line about Bond being a blunt instrument, confronts and provokes. Miss Frost is not pleased about the idea that Bond has been assigned to this case, if for no other reason than the fact that she's worried that he'll blow her cover.
Well, M is not pleased by the fact that Miranda Frost, after working in the MI6 cryptology department for many years, volunteered for this undercover assignment and in 3 months has turned up nothing. And she says, well, as far as I can tell, Graves is clean. And M is like, well, I'm not so sure, so I'm going to send Bond there to do exactly what you said, which is confront and provoke, and then we'll see what happens. And she makes a sort of a veiled warning about not falling for him in that way.
Yeah, there's like this weird undercurrent in the character of Miranda Frost, where like the first time Bond meets her, she's incredibly cold to him. He has this classic Bond come on. She shuts him down. Will I have the pleasure of your company in Iceland? And she's like, you will never have that pleasure, Mr. Bond. And then in this meeting, we find out that despite many advances from your coworkers, you've never fraternized with any of your colleagues. And so there's just this like, she doesn't fall in love with other agents ever thing, which is presumably why they chose to call her Miranda Frost in the context of this film.
Yeah, it's very, very weird and judgy.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, it will become relevant. It will be a relevant plot point later on relating to this aspect of her character that they've established. But in any case, I don't ever want to be in a situation where my boss is questioning me about my propensity to fraternize with my colleagues in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Not only because it will be an uncomfortable conversation there, but then it'll be an uncomfortable conversation when I get home. Meg, you have nothing to worry about.
So Bond arrives in Iceland and pulls up to this fantabulous ice palace. Just this like unreal, enormous looking like Sydney Opera House inspired ice palace. I mean, it's actually inspired by a real hotel.
Sorry, can we talk about how tacky the like composite shot is of him on the highway with the ice palace in the background?
Oh yeah, it sure is.
It's not good. Is it CG or is it a model composited in? Because it doesn't even feel like it tracks with the surroundings properly. Like, it feels like it's disconnected from the earth and floating behind a mountain.
I think it looks like a still, actually, of a model, I assume.
Or a matte painting, maybe? I have no idea. Anyhow, this is one of the... IMO. This is, as with everything in this podcast, this is one of the worst shots in this film.
Yeah, it's not great.
As he's driving up, because it does the speed ramping thing of like the camera. It's a helicopter shot. It's like the helicopter flying super fast. And then it catches up with Bond and circles around the Bond car. And then we see the horizon and there's this ice castle and it looks like literal garbage in the background.
It's so bad.
And then he pulls up to it and it's very impressive.
It's inspired by a real ice hotel named Ice Hotel, one word.
How imaginative.
Yeah, it's rebuilt every year in Sweden.
I have a question about the Swedish ice hotel.
Hmm.
Do they also make all the furniture out of ice, as they do in this film? Or do they just bring furniture in that is not made of ice?
They certainly seem to make the beds out of ice as they are in this film.
Okay.
But then they put like stuff on, like mattresses and things on the beds. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Because in this film, like all the bar chairs are sculpted out of ice, and the bar counter is sculpted out of ice. Everything is sculpted out of ice. And that seems very cold.
Yes.
When a character shows up in a backless dress, leaning against the counter with her bare forearms, I'm like, how? How are you not freezing? I don't know. I feel like I know how ice works. If I rest my arm, even if it's in a cold room, if I rest my body temperature arm against a counter made of ice, that counter is going to melt until I take my arm away.
Miranda Frost does make some sort of idle talk about like balancing the temperature to take all of the guests into account. But you're right about what people are wearing, because like the Real Ice Hotel, they have to keep at -5 Celsius or 23 Fahrenheit. And it's like, you can't be going around wearing a backless dress in that.
No.
Presumably.
But even if you maintain the like heat and cold, I mean, thermodynamics are going to be a problem with the remainder of this film, frankly. But even if you maintain the correct air temperature to keep everything frozen, if you put your hand physically on the ice, that's still going to melt the ice.
Oh, if you ask this movie about the laws of physics, they're just going to respond with that Mariah Carey gif of "I don't know her." So Bond pulls up to the Ice Palace and meets a yet further henchman who introduces himself as Mr. Kill. And Bond's like, oh, great, I'm really glad to hear that. It's spelled K-I-L, just one L, but it's still Mr. Kill. Anyway, he's played by Lawrence Makwari, who is Maori from New Zealand, as the director is as well. And of course, being from New Zealand, obviously he was in Lord of the Rings, because everyone from New Zealand was in Lord of the Rings at one time or another.
Right.
But this guy got to actually be like named dudes. He was Lurtz in Fellowship of the Rings. I mean, all orcs, of course, or Uruk-hai, because of course, he's a big Maori dude. And then in Return of the King, he was both Gothmog and the Witch King.
Ah.
So that's fun. He also played Bolg in The Desolation of Smaug. Bond notices a phenomenally fast, like ice-going super sled zipping through, because it's Graves making another fantastical entrance. And Graves' personal tech guy, Vlad, his name is Vlad, played by Michael Gore, who, say it with me, has been in a whole bunch of things. Mostly not English work, this guy. But regardless, he's very excited to say, hey, great work. You got a new personal best. And Graves slams his gloves at him and is like, the whatever was acting up, fix it, make it better. Graves is such a wiener.
He is. Sorry, before we move on, Michael Gore.
Yeah.
Because I've been like cracking open IMDb pages as you've been mentioning actors. Now the second person from this film who also appeared in 2018's Hunter Killer, a submarine movie alongside Gary Oldman and Gerard Butler.
Huh. Who's the other one?
Toby Stephens.
Oh.
Was also in Hunter Killer.
Weird.
Yeah. Anyhow, that is a connection I noticed. Hunter Killer is fine.
All right.
It's a Gerard Butler movie.
Right. So they get inside, Bond gets shown around, and who else should arrive outside but Jinx? And then we cut to the party. This is where the club mix of the Die Another Day theme song is bumping in the background. It is not improved. Bond orders his martini and notices the Jinx is there and makes some small talk with Jinx. And again, it's just like the flurry of innuendos.
Where my mind wandered during this scene of them pitching innuendos back and forth is, are there drink glasses fashioned from ice?
So I went to that weird ice bar in Vegas, and ours were, but you had to pay extra for that.
Like, they look like they might be?
The martini glass would be pretty tricky to fashion out of ice and have it be stable.
Yeah, that was precisely what I thought. But the wine flute also, they're both like frosted glass, whatever they are. But I don't know, maybe they just took the stemware and put it in the freezer, doused it in water and put it in the freezer, A&W style.
I mean, the thing is they could be, because like apparently Graves built this entire thing just for this demonstration that he's doing that night. So it's like, whatever, why not more conspicuous consumption?
Yeah, as long as it lasts for the night, it's fine.
Yeah. Outside, we see yet another person arrive, who we will find out very momentarily is Zhao. And we cut inside to see Graves with this like wild Technicolor fiber optic face mask that he's wearing. That's very similar to the thing that Zhao had around his head at that gene therapy clinic in Cuba.
But actually serves a totally different purpose in the context of the film.
Yes.
Ish?
Yeah.
So one thing that's really inconsistent from this point forward in the film is the makeup job on Graves's face. Because in some scenes, his skin is like pockmarked and dissolving, or like has these little like nodules or whatever on it. And in other scenes, they're just gone.
Yeah, okay, I noticed that too. I thought I was losing it. I'm like, have those always been there? That's weird.
My assumption is that that is a consequence of reshoots and that there was a plot line about his face dissolving based on who we are soon to learn, who we are going to learn he is in the scene, that got cut and they just didn't do the makeup effect for the reshoots, but that doesn't make a ton of sense. And this device is, as named in the movie, a dream machine that allows him to sleep an hour a day because he can't sleep normally. But does it have rejuvenating skincare effects as well? It's unclear.
Yeah, it's yeah. Zhao says in Korean, "You look terrible," and Graves responds in Korean, "You look pretty terrible yourself." And then they hug. And this is where we find out that Gustav Graves is in fact Colonel Moon from the pre-title sequence. The man on the hovercraft that went off the cliff. He had the gene therapy, and now he looks like this. There's a lot to unpack there. So I'm going to go for the easiest one.
Okay.
Which is Moon goes over the cliff, gets out of Korea somehow with only Zhao being aware of it, gets to Cuba, does the gene therapy, invents a new identity, becomes known the world over as Gustav Graves of the Graves Corporation, finds this mine in Iceland, gets knighted, and MI6 is still only like, we think there might be something there. How do you just invent a guy with only a year of history and no one can turn up anything suspicious about your backstory?
Yeah, he did all this in 14 months.
Yeah.
Rose from obscurity.
What the hell?
Founded an international diamond smuggling operation. You know, okay, so the worst part of all this we haven't even gotten to yet that makes this timeline make even less sense is what his ultimate plan is.
Yep.
Because the project development timeline on a piece of technology like that is measured in decades, not months.
Recall that in GoldenEye, their satellites still had CCCP markings on them. And he's done everything that we're about to see in a year.
Yeah. And that's a year, assuming that the gene therapy only took 2 months.
I mean, I guess it can't have taken that long considering Zhao is already all the way through phase 1 after like a day and a half. So Zhao got back into North Korea, then also somehow escaped, went to Cuba, and had a light touch of the gene therapy, and now looks like Professor Egghead. It's just...
Graham, I think this movie might be very silly.
I think this movie might be profoundly silly, but not in the good way. I think Moonraker is profoundly silly, but I love it in a good way. I think this movie is very silly and not in a good way.
Yeah, I'm with you. Moving right along.
Yeah. Miranda Frost sort of insinuates herself into the conversation between Jinx and Bond, and then they head outside for the demonstration. Bond notices that there's 3 Korean-looking guys in suits sort of standing over to the side. There's a huge assembly of people, and Graves unveils this thing he's been working on, Project Icarus, which is a massive satellite with a huge reflector dish to give the world a second sun. And he turns it on, and it bathes everyone in reflected sunlight, which, for whatever reason, cameras can't comprehend in the same way that they can comprehend normal sunlight. I think it would have been cooler if this was just it looked like daylight, but instead it's weird and overexposed and blown out, and it looks bad. It just looks bad.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. If you want to demonstrate that you have created a second sun that will allow, as he says, it's imagine we can grow crops anywhere in the world all year long. We can do all the various things that need sunlight and bring a new era of prosperity to our world. Don't you want to just demonstrate that it replicates daylight?
Yeah.
And would that not still be a cool effect from the film production crew to be hey, look, we're shooting at night, and it just becomes day through an effect of lighting.
They did it on an episode of Malcolm in the Middle. There's an episode where they blow up an enormous firework and it shows them standing in a field and then it goes off. It goes like bwamp and it cuts to the same shot on location in daylight and then fades back to them standing there in the same positions at nighttime. And it's hilarious.
Yeah. I mean, I think from a visual effects perspective, actually like setting up your lighting rig so that you can replicate daylight,
That'd be amazing.
doing it as a practical effect with no cut
That'd be so cool.
would be super cool. But instead they did this.
Yeah. Everyone, I say everyone not important to the story puts on ridiculous Bret Hart sunglasses. Bond and Jinx just stare directly at Graves, who is also not wearing sunglasses. Presumably just their corneas screaming in pain. Graves is like, that's it. That's the whole demonstration. And then Vlad comes up to the podium where he was and shuts down this massive briefcase that he has that is like the thing that controls the Icarus. And they take it back into the geodesic dome building beside the Ice Palace, which is Graves's mine and also his residence. So Bond sneaks in with the car, and in the field, in practice, the car looks like Predator from the Predator movies, because it's like just sort of a ripple effect, and that you could definitely see if you were there in person. But I'll tell you what, I had to send Featherweight a couple reference photos, and in motion, it's like, wow, that's really obvious. The stills are like, it's actually kind of hard to see the car.
Yeah. Again, overdoing it with the special effect, though, because the cool effect that I want to see is not the stupid refraction of the car that makes it less convincing. The cool effect that I want to see that is cool from, like, how did they do that, is the tire treads just appearing in the snow.
Yeah.
Because what we do get tire treads appearing in the snow in really bad CGI, where they're like not actually aligned at all. Anyhow,
having used that to sneak inside the fence of this area, Bond now gets out of the car and snoops around. Graves is talking to Vlad inside. Vlad gives him what is essentially a Nintendo Power Glove. And Graves is like, so 50,000 volts, like I said? And Vlad's like, no, 100,000 volts.
But how many amps? It's the amperage that gets you.
Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned that. You could technically survive 100,000 volts if the amperage wasn't deadly. You could be killed by 20 volts. But this Power Glove now does 100,000 volts, which is fine, I suppose. Bond is spotted and some people come and try to chase him. He undoes this high pressure valve, which knocks them back with some hot water from a spring explodes, and then there's an intruder alert sound and guys come looking for him. And out in the parking lot while he's being pursued, Miranda Frost grabs him, pulls him between two cars, and starts making out with him. And she says, I'm MI6. M told me that this might happen or whatever, like, I'll just go with it. I'm here to protect you. He immediately is just like flips on the charm or whatever. And she's like, oh God, why are you like this? Ew. And she's
don't make this awkward.
Yeah, here's the thing. She's terrific in this scene, and the whole like having to go with this like noted womanizer James Bond and like going along with his flirtations and stuff is played really amusingly by her. She's great at that. Why did she do this? Because we find out later she's a double agent. She's working for Graves. Why does she do this? She functionally, in the course of the plot, betrays him immediately, right? They go to bed together, they get up the next day, and she betrays him. Why not now?
You're right. Why not just sell him out now?
Just let him get caught.
Yeah, you're right. I hadn't thought of that, but you're totally right.
It blows my mind.
What gets me, what I was distracted by, the reason I didn't come up with that, is in this scene. It's Mr. Kill sees Bond. Guy walks up behind Bond with a gun. Bond turns around, clocks the guy. Kill hears this and sees a dude in a tuxedo outside the geodesic dome in a fist fight. And then he gets some goons to come out and find them out. He walks out and it's like, where could he be? The only person out here in a tuxedo is making out with that lady over there. Definitely couldn't be that guy. If only there was snow all over the ground so that we could look at the footprints and see where they came from and went.
Hey, what are these tire tracks doing here?
What was that noise?
Oh God. Because the car stays there until later.
Yeah. I don't know. Now I feel I have to issue a mea culpa here because the makeout totally works in Captain America the Winter Soldier, and it is explained in Captain America the Winter Soldier that public displays of affection make people uncomfortable, and so they're disinclined to interrupt. And that's what's working for Frost and Bond here, is that particular, like, oh, they're making out. Well, clearly that's weird. I don't want to get involved. That's why, as far as I'm concerned, if it's in the MCU, it's gospel.
Fair enough.
The Winter Soldier had it, so it must be true. In any case, the actual reason we don't know yet is that Mr. Kill undoubtedly knows that she is a double agent, and so sees Frost making out with this guy and is like, she's got it covered.
I don't know which one of us is the solar system brain and which one of us is the galaxy brain. Like, I don't know what order those go in, but
I am just standing at a wall covered in red yarn, like pointing at papers right now.
I'm trying to figure it out, man. God. While this is happening, Jinx is breaking into Graves' space. It's an amazing location. And this is actually a location. This is a place called the Eden Project in Cornwall. It's a massive botanical garden. So, like, the exterior is not like a snowy expanse. The exterior is, well, it's Cornwall. The interior does, in fact, look like this, and it looks really cool.
The interior is like that of a TARDIS, because the interior is much, much, much larger than the dome that we see outside.
That is also true. Bond and Frost go back to his room, and he's like, you should stay here tonight to keep up the appearance that we're lovers. And she's like, good idea, and immediately gets naked. And I feel like Bond has this expression on his face of like, I didn't think that would work, and I thought that I would experience more pushback on that one, but all right. Because all he says is you should stay here tonight to keep up the appearance of being lovers. But she's like, sounds great. Let's bone.
He's like, 60% of the time, it works every time.
Yeah. So he puts his gun under his pillow and they have sex on an enormous bed of ice shaped like a swan.
But with a mattress in it.
Yes, yes.
Unlike the fishbowl bed made of like plexiglass from Diamonds Are Forever.
Yeah. So Jinx, in her oxblood colored leather catsuit, sneaks into where Graves is using, I'm just going to call it the Dream Machine, the weird fiber optic mask.
He calls it the Dream Machine.
Yeah, right. Okay. Sneaks into where Graves is using the Dream Machine and flips it up and finds out that it is not Graves, it is Zhao, who is in fact awake, and Graves is behind her and electrocutes her with his power glove. What is Jinx doing? Anyway, having now done the sex, Frost hands Bond back his gun, and he dresses up in his black pants, black turtleneck getup and heads out to investigate Graves further. Jinx wakes up on a very strange robotic table that she's been tied to, and Zhao is interrogating her by electrocuting her with the power glove. And then it's like the room where they have like lasers in the room that they use for the maintaining the appearance of the mine. Like Zhao actually says to her, just between you and me, the mine is fake, but these lasers are real.
So like this is very definitely a Goldfinger reference.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
But I don't understand why they are clearly, visibly making a visual reference. Why is the laser that they choose to use the one that cuts horizontally across her head?
I don't know.
If you're going to draw a visual reference to Goldfinger, go the whole way and cut vertically from the bottom.
I think that might honestly be a little bit more visually problematic with a woman.
Maybe, I guess, that might be a conversation they had.
Yeah, I'm saying I am assuming that is the conclusion they came to.
That could be. In any case, it's a table with a laser. Do you expect me to talk? No, I expect you to die. They don't say that in the film, but it's the scene.
It's now just about morning. Bond uses his own laser to cut a hole in the ice in the parking lot, put a rebreather in, dive under the ice, swim under Graves' building, and come up in a hot spring pool inside the dome.
Yes.
I feel like those water systems can't possibly be connected.
Good, because I also had a real hard time with that. It's like, how cold is that water? Wait, I guess there's a volcanic spring in the facility. Wait, how is there a layer, like multiple inch thick layer of ice over hot water? What? Sure.
But before you have too long to think about that, it's time for a disco fight.
So, as we go into the disco fight, my first question is, when Mr. Kill turns on the laser, you see the articulated arm come over and position itself, right?
Mhm.
But it's already shooting the laser when it does this. So Mr. Kill has just cut an arc of laser across the entire back of the room as it positions the laser beam in place to begin the cutting. So I guess that's more of a statement than question, but did nobody else think of that?
Bond comes into the room where Jinx is like, help, turn it off, shut it off, because the laser's getting closer and closer to her head. He shuts off the laser. She's like, whoof. Then he gets attacked from behind by Mr. Kill. And then for the rest of this scene, the table that Jinx is attached to and all the lasers in the room just go buck wild. They just start effing flinging around, aiming every which way. And so Bond is just trying to have a fist fight with the heavy while there's lasers that they're having to dodge. And it's everything. I liked the sword fight scene. This, everything feels contrived. Every moment of it is just like, none of this is believable.
Yeah. Hey, Graham.
Yeah.
We had one laser. What if we had 6 lasers?
I think that would be too many lasers, Matt.
Well, the filmmakers didn't. Yeah, you're right. This scene, it's a disco fight. It's impossible to track. None of the character movements make any sense in context with where the lasers are. Also, why are the lasers not cutting any of the rest of the room as per the articulated? Like, is the room just constructed out of laser-proof metal? It's clearly not. In fact, it's clearly not, because we can see that the laser leaves a scoring mark in the table that Jinx is shackled to. None of this makes any sense. It's just lights and motion.
It ends with the lasers finally being turned off, Mr. Kill trapping Bond and strangling him and threatening him with a knife, and Jinx managing to get a hold of the hanging controls for the lasers, and she pilots a laser into position behind Mr. Kill's head and bores through his brain with a laser so it comes out his mouth as he screams his last. And I was like, that's tonally grim for this movie.
It is. I'm also just really impressed with Jinx's aim, because the position that Bond was in, that laser beam should have shot through Bond as well.
The lasers seem to know exactly where the operator wants them to go. Like when Kill was lining up the laser earlier, he was like, boop, and it just goes, ah, yes, you want me in the slice this woman's head off position. Right here. You know, and when she's lining it up for Mr. Kill, it's like, ah, yes, aim at back of head. I understand. Like, it just knows exactly where to be.
Yeah.
So now that Mr. Kill has been Mr. Killed, Bond and Jinx can finally figure out what is going on between them. Bond says, look, what are you, CIA? And she says, NSA. Now, this is probably one of the least important wrong things in the movie, but the NSA, the National Security Agency, is an intelligence gathering arm of the Department of Defense. And sure, they may have agents that operate overseas, but not as assassins.
As far as we know. Now I'm reaching for my other wall full of papers and red string.
Like, why not just be like, who are you, CIA? And her go, yes. Why the NSA of all things?
Because it's 2002 and the NSA is a relatively new agency. Well, I don't know if it's relatively new, but have recently been empowered.
Oh my God, you're right.
That's my guess. Founded in 1952, but had just been empowered with new purview.
The War on Terror.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
The world has changed, Graham.
Look, I still think it's very silly, but that at least explains why the filmmakers thought it would be a good idea. So here's kind of another weird problem that I have with like the pacing of this movie. Generally speaking, the bad guy will be suspicious in some way and Bond will be investigating or trying to figure out what's going on. They'll know that they're up to something, and then the big thing is revealed, and then Bond is like, we have to go stop that. And in this one, he's jumped right to we have to go stop that.
Yeah, because we don't know what the evil thing is yet.
Yeah, Jinx was about to kill him, and he actually hasn't yet revealed what the big evil thing is yet. He just showed off the big sunlight reflector, which is not the evil thing, and she was gonna kill him.
It's the opposite of what Mr. Burns did, so clearly it's good. Sorry, that was a bit of a deep cut Simpsons reference, but...
No, my heavy sigh was not in response to that. Don't worry.
No, it's just in response to literally everything out of my mouth.
No, I was sighing heavily because of this movie. So, okay. So now they have to get out of this place, which is controlled by handprint. And Bond is like, oh, I guess we need Mr. Kill's help. And he tries to move the body. And Jinx is like, wait, I have a better idea. Mercifully off shot, just severs his hand with one of the lasers.
It's like the second most grim thing in this movie.
Yeah. So Bond says, you go off, tell Miranda, she's MI6. She'll figure out how to get us out of here. I'm going to go settle the score with Graves, even though I have to assume Jinx would be like, I also want to kill him, but whatever. Graves arrives back at his cool, like, observatory room inside the dome, and Bond is there. Bond is gloating a little bit.
He specifically says, so you live to die another day.
Ooh, he said the title.
He said the thing.
Nice.
He got title drop, and he did say live to die another day.
He did, yeah. Oh, I realized that we actually forgot to mention in the previous scene when Bond and Jinx are talking, Jinx is like, I just saw Zhao. He's in there in the like weird dream machine thing, like in Cuba. He must have brought it. And Bond is like, he couldn't have brought it from Cuba. That means it was already here. That means it was for someone else. That means I know what's going on. And so that's how he pieces together very quickly. He figures out the whole thing with Gustav Graves. And so Bond now tells Graves that he knows what's going on. And Graves is like, oh, yeah, it was... One of the questions I had initially when I was watching this movie is like, why does he even want Bond in Iceland? Why does he invite him there? But he actually says why here, because he's been enjoying watching Bond not be able to figure out what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been two quips of Graves. I mean, first of all, there was just a bit at the fencing club where he's like, have we met before? Because he knows that they have and Bond didn't. And then when Bond arrived at the Ice Palace, Graves made a quip about who we are under the skin, which completely flew over Bond's head, of course. Because this is just Graves making jokes that entertain him because Bond doesn't know his true nature, basically. He says that when he reimagined himself as Gustav Graves, he modeled it, or took inspiration at least, from Bond, who sort of looks dubious at that. And Graves says, no, just in the details, the unearned swagger, you know. He makes it clear that he's not saying that they look alike physically, but that the way that he acts this character is what he imagines James Bond to be, which is why I find it funny that Toby Stephens has been voicing James Bond in those radio plays.
Mm-hmm.
While he's having his monologue, Bond sees Miranda Frost walk up behind and hold her gun up to Graves. Graves says, it looks like Miss Frost was not all she appeared to be. And then she turns the gun at Bond because Graves says, you never did figure out who that mole in your organization was, did you? And it turns out it was Miranda Frost. Bond gets really angry and tries to, even though her gun is trained on him, he tries to very quickly shoot her, but his gun is empty. And she says, it was so good of you to bring your gun to bed last night. Surely James Bond 007 would be able to tell that his gun was empty.
By weight alone, one would think.
Right?
Yeah. But also, surely James Bond 007, super spy, and victim of many a double cross over the years, emotionally stunted psychopath that he is, would not blindly accept a gun from anyone without checking to see if it was loaded first.
Yeah.
Before walking into a combat situation, he is not going to pick up a gun that is handed to him by anybody and not first check to make sure there's ammunition in it. You're losing your edge, Bond.
Graves reveals that Frost started working for him after he arranged for the gold medal winner in Sydney to have that steroid overdose, giving her the gold medal, because they both, Graves and Frost, like to win at any cost. And that was what it took for her to start working for him. So that's her motivation.
So this is where my question about the timeline of Miranda Frost. She spent 3 years in MI6 cryptography before volunteering for this role.
Yeah.
It is now 2002.
Yeah.
The Olympics that she participated in were in 2000, which means that while she was an MI6 agent working in cryptography, she was also training full-time as a fencer to participate in the Sydney Olympics.
Yes, and won silver.
Won gold.
Yeah, then won gold after the, at the time, Colonel Moon arranged for that person to overdose, thereby her winning and her being like, sounds great, now I will work for you. And she was the one that told Zhao that it was Bond, I guess.
I mean, she was the mole, right? Like, she was
Yeah.
definitely the one that set them up. That's the clear implication. She was feeding information. I should give Miranda Frost a pass here, strictly on the grounds that James Bond is Olympic level good at everything and absolutely does not have time to learn how to do that. So Miranda Frost being both a cryptographer working for MI6 and training to be an Olympic athlete is not that big a reach.
That's true. What's the opposite of giving credit?
Taking credit?
Who the character of whom I am critical in this is M, because Bond was like, somebody on the inside set me up. Someone set me up then. They set me up for this exchange with Zhao. There's this whole thing with Gustav Graves, and M is like, gee, Miranda Frost, you haven't managed to show any results in 3 months. That's weird.
A perfect Judi Dench impression, by the way.
In a future scene, she will be critical of Damien Falco and say that we wouldn't even be in this situation if you had told us that Frost and Moon both did fencing training together, like Frost and Colonel Moon did.
At what, Harvard?
I think so, yeah.
Why is it incumbent on the CIA guy, the American liaison to MI6, to volunteer that information? Why is MI6 not running a thorough background check on all previous contacts?
Was on Harvard fencing team with son of North Korean general pop up?
One would think.
I miss GoldenEye.
Also, no, hold on. Now, back up a second. Even if the background check run through the CIA guy had turned up that she was on a fencing team at Harvard with the son of a North Korean general, that might have posed a security flag on her file that she could have explained away. Because this mission, where she is assigned to be seeking information on Gustav Graves, has nothing to do with the son of a North Korean general. So she would not even have had reason to suspect that that particular security risk would have any bearing on this case, at least not until Bond got involved.
Once again, I hasten to stress to our listeners that in any other Bond movie, this would be the one thing that we can hand wave, but that this movie is entirely moments like this.
Why did Goldfinger bring all those mob guys to his base?
Right?
At the point when Bond joins this case, then M probably should have another look at Frost, right? And in that case, there's like that connection where it's like, well, Bond is hunting down Zhao, and this guy was a compatriot of Zhao, and Miranda was a teammate of Moon at Harvard, and Miranda volunteered for this case, and now Bond thinks that there's a connection to North Korea with this case, and Miranda hasn't turned up any results, and with the additional piece of evidence that the American guy had volunteered the information that Miranda had been on the fencing team with Colonel Moon, then maybe they would have pieced all those various parts together. But at this point, we're reaching for like M's board of papers in red string in order to like expect her to figure this out.
Oh, man. So, in the movie that is happening, remember that ring that breaks through glass? Well, they happen to all be standing on glass, so as Frost is about to fire the gun at Bond, he activates the ring and touches it to the floor, which makes the entire floor shatter. He was already sort of doubled over on his knee because Zhao punched him in the guts, and he like oversold it so he could crouch down. Anyway, the whole floor goes through. He and Frost fall through, but he's expecting it and she's not, so he lands better and is able to run out of there using actually the like extraction cable that Jinx had just left dangling around there when she broke in. And then once on top of the dome, he then is able to attach it to himself and use it to then run down the side of the dome, which is pretty cool.
I want to touch on the musical cue that plays just after they fall through the glass floor, because this one really struck me. This was the one that actually reminded me, or made me realize that they are doing musical reference to other films. He falls through the floor and he starts running as Frost is shooting off behind him. The music goes da 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 dun, like it actually fully goes into OHMSS.
Oh, dang. How did I miss that?
It's slowed down, like it's not obvious, but clearly drawing reference to OHMSS. And that was not the only audio cue that I caught. I don't remember what the other one was off the top of my head. At a couple of different points in the movie, they pull on theme songs from older films, and that was just a particularly striking instance of it. Remember that thing you liked? We're like that.
So Bond gets in Graves's ice sled and takes off across this enormous frozen lake, while there's another just egregious speed ramp spin around of Graves and Frost just watching this happen motionless. It's just like, whoosh, like just, why? Don't do that. Anyway, Zhao pursues him. Actually, there's this weird temporal thing where Zhao chases Bond all the way outside and sees him getting into the sled and sort of barks orders, go kill him. And then suddenly he's back upstairs with Graves going, he got away. And it's like, well, you were actively chasing him. Continue to chase him. Why? Why did you go back inside to tell Graves that he'd gotten away? You were right there.
This is another one of those things that I would chalk up to reshoots.
Oh, for sure.
But I have no idea whether they did reshoots on this film or not. I assume they did, but it's definitely what I would assume happened.
Graves tells Zhao to get the generals. He does. He brings in the 3 Korean men that Bond saw at the demonstration, because Graves is going to show off the other neat trick that the Icarus does, which is, of course, orbital laser.
Hey, Graham.
Yeah.
Remember how we had a diamond-encrusted satellite that fired a space laser?
Yeah.
What if we had a really big diamond-encrusted satellite that fires a mile-wide laser?
Does he say it's a mile wide?
I'm probably exaggerating. It looks like it's probably a couple hundred meters.
Well,
what if we had a really big diamond-encrusted space satellite that fires a 100-meter wide laser?
Well, then I would say that's a bit silly.
And you would be right.
So Graves uses this laser to chase Bond, and it just starts like destroying all the ice and like trees that get in the way. And it's in the middle of this, Vlad comes over and is like, hey boss, he beat your time.
That does not impress Graves.
No. Bond fires the grappling hook that has been established to be on the back end of this thing and flies off a cliff. So it catches, and Bond is now in this sled dangling on like the edge of the planet is what it looks like. He's dangling on the side of this glacial ice shelf because he's now gone so far from the lake that they were at.
One question, maybe you'll know. I'm actually curious.
All right.
The VFX shot of the rocket sled, like launching off the side of the glacial shelf, like swinging down like a pendulum until it lands aside the glacial shelf so that he's dangling vertically. That VFX shot is like 4 frames per second. It's like a slideshow. Do you have any idea why that is? Why is it so janky?
I can only assume it is an homage to the Christmas specials of Rankin and Bass. No, I have no idea why the frame rate is so bad on that one shot. It does not make sense to me.
It's super weird. Anyhow, another diversion, but there's another bad shot coming up. So Bond is now hanging vertically off the glacial ice shelf. He like opens the cockpit of the sled and like opens the parachute hatch on the back. You know, he's worried that the laser is still coming for him. So he's like trying to break the hatch off and get the parachute out so that he can free himself from this situation. As Graves is like, all right, it's time to cut off the shelf. And he uses the satellite to carve the point of the ice shelf off in a horizontal line, causing the entire thing to calve and to begin to crash into the sea. That shot is also really not good. Like the CG of the glacier calving into the sea is also very, very tacky CGI. It does not look great. And how does Bond escape? Well, Bond uses the hatch as like a wakeboard, and then he grabs the parachute with both hands and like parasail wakeboards the wave that is created by this ice shelf calving into the sea. And the whole shot is CG, and it's not very convincing.
I don't remember if this looked good in 2002, but it looks like balls now.
It probably, like everything from that era, which is a reason that I similarly am big on practical effects and like use models, use miniatures where you can.
Mm-hmm.
But there was that era of filmmaking from the 90s to the early 2000s where everything was so infatuated with like CG, and the CG just wasn't there yet. Alien 3 falls victim to this really badly, where the aliens just look like garbage now. My unpopular opinion is that Alien 3 is unfairly maligned and is better than it gets credit for, but holy God, do the CG aliens look bad. And I wish they had just used people in suits. And animatronics and things like that to make it look good. Because in that same year, if I'm thinking correctly, I think that same year was that was when, or it was like 93. And then in 96, Jurassic Park came out. And Jurassic Park still looks amazing today.
Jurassic Park was 1993.
Oh, was it 93?
Yeah.
Maybe I have those dates backwards. Anyhow, it was totally possible to do great things with CGI used well, with an understanding of the limitations of that particular medium. And a lot of films tried to push it further than it was capable of. And this is a good example of that. And I think it probably looked as good as any other film from the era did at the time. But again, it's another thing that contributes to this film feeling super dated because it sticks out like a sore thumb now.
Yeah, this is the one that I mentioned a couple episodes ago that was really stuck in my head as just being I have this image of Bond surfing down a CG thing. And there's some close-up shots of Brosnan on green screen, which are mapped over the CG, but there's a lot of the really shaky shots in Lord of the Rings where it's all the close-up stuff looks really good, and then there's a clearly computer-generated Legolas doing flips and crap.
Yes.
And you have that with Bond here. The wide shots where Bond is small is very clearly a CG man going beep-a-doop-a-doo.
Yes. His movements are just not natural. He's too rubbery.
Yeah.
So anyhow, he rides the wave and ramps off of an iceberg and manages to jump back up onto the 200-meter tall ice shelf somehow. We don't talk about that. But he's back. He's safe, and the wave crashes against the ice behind him, and he looks on, thinking about how he's going to get back.
Back at the Ice Palace, of course, Jinx did not find Miranda Frost because she does not work for MI6, and they trap her in the Ice Palace, which they are about to sink. Back out on the ice, a snowmobiler, I guess maybe is looking for Bond? It's unclear what he's doing out there, but Bond has strung his parachute across a narrow passageway and pulls it up like a tripwire and knocks the guy off the snowmobile and takes off back towards the Ice Palace. As he's doing so, he sees that a plane is coming in to land. Bond goes and gets back in his car, but a different snowmobiler then runs into his car, and Zhao realizes that Bond is still there, and then we're back out on the ice for round 2 of Ice Chase, where this time it is Bond in the invisible Aston Martin Vanquish versus Zhao in a Jaguar that has a minigun on the back of it.
Hey, Graham.
Yeah.
We have one gadget car. What if we had 2 gadget cars?
I just like the Jaguar was yes, you can make our gadget car the bad guy's car. Because they did work with Jaguar for that, right?
Right.
It's hey, we want the bad guy to have a gadget car too. Can that be you? And they were yeah, sure.
I mean, you take what you can get, right? It's a sweet car. The minigun is rad.
Yeah.
I have relatively few problems with this particular scene. I'm goofing on it a little bit because it's, again, emblematic of let's take everything to 11 and overdo it.
There's some very Fast and Furious speed ramps where it goes from the fast motion straight to the slow motion and then to normal speed. And it's please stop being made in 2002.
If you could just stop.
So yeah, this is an extended sequence. It's pretty cool. The camo gets knocked out pretty quickly, and there's this countdown timer that's rebooting camouflage that becomes relevant when that eventually kicks back in. And yeah, both their cars have gadgets, so they're just firing missiles and rockets and mortars and all sorts of stuff at one another. There's one part where Bond's car gets flipped over, and then Zhao fires a missile at him, and Bond fires his passenger ejector seat, the force of which flips his car back over in just enough time to dodge the missile. So that part's pretty cool.
Yeah. One part I like in the scene is when Bond is driving backwards and Zhao is driving forwards, and they both have missile banks in the front of their car.
Mm-hmm.
And Bond fires a missile, and then Zhao fires a missile, and the missiles hit each other and explode in between them.
Yeah.
And they're having this missile duel where they're countering each other's missiles.
Zhao fires some mortars, and Bond's auto-targeting shotguns take care of them. And eventually, their chase leads them all the way back to the Ice Palace, which is being actively melted by the Icarus.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we haven't mentioned Zhao's car is a convertible. He's got the top down.
He's getting very damp.
And cold. Like, again, thermodynamics. Like, he was out in the ice fields, like, driving at breakneck speed. The wind chill has got a nip. But I'm pretty sure melting works like boiling, right? Now all the thermophysicists are going to get up in my grill. When you boil water, the water rises to the temperature of 100 degrees and then stays there until it boils off. And I'm pretty sure melting does the same thing. The water rises to the temperature of 0 degrees and then stays there. I guess unless it's at the surface level where it's got enough, there's enough insulation between the top and the bottom where the water that's directly in contact with the laser beam is maybe heating, but it should be transmitting that energy to the lower energy molecules of water further down. My point here is that isn't all of this water basically just a hair above the freezing point? Like, he's got to be very cold.
Yeah. I don't know if anything that you said about boiling or melting points is correct, but surely Zhao has to be cold right now.
Yes.
On that, we agree.
The long and the short of it here is that Zhao must be very cold.
Yeah. So they start just flying around inside the ice palace, which is cool. I do like this chase. Overall, this entire car battle chase is apart from some of the speed ramp editing, is you know what? I'm on board.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of culminates with Bond getting to the room where Jinx is about to drown because they've locked her in and the room's filling with water. The camouflage comes back online. Bond sends out traction grip spikes from his wheels. Zhao sends out an enormous battering ram from the front of his car and just starts barreling at Bond. Bond turns on the camo, disappears. Zhao can't see him anymore and just flies through where he was, off a balcony, through the middle of the main lobby area and right through the floor into the frozen water. And we realize that Bond hit the camouflage and then reversed up a wall with his grip tires. Not up a wall. That makes it sound completely unreasonable.
Yeah, it's a ramp thing of collapsed ice.
It's 45 degrees, yeah.
Yeah. My problem with this,
Mm-hmm.
I have a problem with this. I have a problem with everything. I'm sorry. My problem with this, and they get away with it because it's cool, right? But the whole timer of waiting for the camo to come back on is completely false stakes because Bond did not need to use the camo. He had already won. The camo added nothing to this win. He was already in position. Zhao was already driving at him before he initiated the camo. And the only effect of the camo was still where did he go? How did he get out of this one for the audience? But all he did was drive backwards. And the film has telegraphed this extensively. But Zhao, at no point was Zhao in a position where he was going to be able to stop. He had committed. So all Bond needed to do was roll back and Zhao would have just cruised right by him, whether the camo was active or not.
That's true.
So the camo did nothing.
Yeah, if Zhao couldn't have stopped having realized that Bond went invisible, he couldn't have stopped if Bond had just moved.
Yeah.
Fair point. All right. I misspoke earlier. Bond is not actually outside his room. He has to now get there, but on his way, he drives past Zhao, who is trying to climb out of the pool that he's in, and Bond shoots down one of the crystal chandeliers, which falls on Zhao, and then the water churns red. And that's also kind of gross.
I suspect it's not easy when you're driving at 60 miles an hour through a hotel made of ice that is currently actively melting to reach one hand out your driver's side window, your left hand. Oh no, sorry, right hand drive. It is his right hand. To reach your gun out your window, fire 2 shots, and hit a rope 50 to 100 meters away.
Bond's very good at things.
Bond is very good at things.
The next thing he's good at is he drives through the door to his room, which lets all the torrent of water out, and Jinx, who is now unconscious, flops onto his windshield. So he uses the glass break ring again to break his windshield, which lets her fall inside the car. Then he drives at speed through the sidewall of the thing, landing the car in a snowbank, leaps out of the car with her, and runs to that hot spring that we saw before, and dives in with her to reheat her body and also give her mouth to mouth, and eventually she comes to.
I'm given to understand that's how recovery from hypothermia and drowning works.
Yeah, probably.
You just come back and are fine.
Sure, why not? It's the movies.
It's the movies.
I'll give it that one. They see that big plane now leave. They're like, okay, so obviously they're all on that plane. There was also a brief cut in there of Graves talking to Vlad and being like, look, you're into ergonomics. This briefcase sucks. Make it better. Oh, God. Anyway, then we cut to a U.S. command bunker in the demilitarized zone in South Korea. Robinson is there, and M is there, and Damien Falco is there. This is where M is like, "If you just told us about Miranda Frost," which we've already talked about.
Hey, Graham.
Yeah.
We've had one conversation about the history of Miranda Frost. I'm kidding. Let's carry on.
Okay. I was like, are we doing it again? What? We already went over this. Oh no. So they've pinpointed the plane and it's inside North Korea. So obviously they can't touch it. And James is like, well, you can't, but I can. And M's like, yeah, you can. We're going to send Bond in there. And Falco's like, well, I'm not going to send him alone. So you, the agent from the NSA, are going with him. So, God, everything is over the top. We cut again to inside a military plane where Bond and Jinx are attached to a device that they call a jackknife.
A jackknife or a switchblade?
A switchblade?
I think they're switchblades because the wings pop out. Like
that makes sense.
Anyhow, this is a perfectly normal Halo jump that they have now turned into. They're riding little personal jet things that are invisible to radar that the wings pop out of because we did a Halo jump in like the last movie.
I assume this is to help them steer?
I guess. They end up ditching them halfway down, and the only thing I can think of is that they obviously could not fly their plane over North Korea because the insertion plane is too big. And so they had to use the switchblades to get from probable South Korean airspace over the DMZ. But that is not explained in the movie. It's only alluded to.
Yeah. The Americans' plan, by the way, since they weren't going to go in there, is that they're just going to send a missile at Graves' satellite, which they do. And then Graves is like, oh, okay, shoot it out of the sky. And then so they just point the laser at the missile and the missile goes away.
Who could have predicted this?
So my thought, now go with me on this journey, because I think this is the big brain play. 2 missiles from 2 different directions. Hadn't thought of that.
Wasn't the Diamonds Are Forever laser literally a missile countermeasure system? Not that there's any continuity between these movies, but wasn't that its actual thing? Like it was literally designed to shoot missiles out of the sky?
I guess. I just don't know why they don't go, oh, that didn't work. Well, what if we fired lots of missiles? Like, seriously, only one needs to get through.
Yeah.
The thing seems kind of cumbersome. So Bond and Jinx are now outside the airfield, and Bond has a sniper rifle, and he's trying to take the shot at Graves, and he can't get the shot, and they get on the plane. So Bond's like, well, guess we need to get on that plane. So they cut through the gate and run up to the plane and jump into the landing gear.
Yep.
Going forward, Graves is now dressed in Korean military uniform, and the 3 men that we saw earlier are also now revealed to be Korean generals. They are indeed actually generals, and they're also in their uniform. He asks for his dad because Damien Falco mentioned that General Moon, who would never attack South Korea, has been arrested by hardliners, which I assume are these 3. So General Moon gets brought onto the bridge, and we get the reveal of the more ergonomic satellite controls that Vlad has been working on as Graves turns around and he's wearing like a chest plate and arm pieces. One of them controls the satellite and one of them does the electrical stuff. And on his head, he's wearing like, they look like terrible VR goggles. I mean, they are VR goggles, essentially.
Bug-eye VR goggle things.
Yeah, they're like bug-eyed Google Glass.
I don't know if this looked cool in 2002.
It sure as hell doesn't look cool now.
No. Anyhow, Graves is wearing like 1/4 of a RoboCop.
He spins around and it's meant to be like the big reveal. The like, hello, I'm the evil guy. And he's immediately undercut by how stupid it looks. It is not remotely threatening.
No, it's not. It doesn't help that the chest piece is clearly prop modified football pads.
Oh, it really is too.
It really, really is.
Yeah. So he says in Korean, "Father, I'm sorry we had to meet like this." And General Moon is like, what's going on? And so they have this goes on for some time, but he eventually convinces him that he is in fact Colonel Moon, that he is actually his son. And then he realizes what his son is trying to do. He's like, "Come on, father, watch my plan." And he uses the Icarus laser to start blowing away the minefield in the DMZ. He is creating a mine-free pathway between North and South Korea so that the North Korean army can sweep in and invade South Korea. Now, he says all the superpowers will be afraid of our amazing laser, but like, this is the plan. We are finally, an hour and 55 minutes into this movie, finding out that his plan is to destroy all the mines in the DMZ. Well, not even all the mines, to make a pathway so that they can move troops down from North Korea.
That seems perhaps not like a strategically sound avenue of attack.
I just don't know why you wouldn't just use the laser like on South Korean military installations or whatever.
Oh, I mean, yeah, because then it really would be Diamonds Are Forever.
But did you have this orbital death laser? Just like, I don't know. Go for it.
No, we're gonna carve a 100-meter wide hallway that the South Koreans can park 300 tanks at the end of and cut our forces down as we try to invade. And it will be directed by Zack Snyder and totally awesome.
General Moon, for his part, thinks this is a terrible idea and pulls a gun on Colonel Moon / Graves, and they have a tussle, but the electrical power glove wins and Graves ends up shooting his father. So he's well into the megalomaniacal villain mode at this point. Bond and Jinx are on the plane, by the way. I don't know how they got out of the landing gear area, but they are indeed sneaking around the plane. This massive plane. This is like one of those like extra super enormous. The room where most of this stuff is happening with Graves is like the lower half of the nose with these big open windows. It makes it look like a Zeppelin.
It does. It feels like the cockpit of a Zeppelin.
Yeah, which is kind of cool. I don't know if this plane... Oh, hang on. I have a website for this.
How's that sponsorship deal coming?
I don't even know who I would begin to email. This is an Antonov AN-124, a strategic airlift jet aircraft designed during the Soviet era and produced until the early 2000s. One of the largest ever manufactured airplanes, being able to carry up to 150 tons of cargo.
Neat. Do they normally have the glass observation window at the front?
No.
Ah, okay. It's an aftermarket edition, like the spoiler.
I'm surprised Graves hasn't put a spoiler on his Antonov. This is that plane that they have all the cool photos of, like, the nose cone flipped up and absolutely enormous things being loaded into a plane.
Ah, yes. It's full of tinier planes.
Precisely, yeah. It shows up in Fast and Furious 6.
Oh, on the endless runway.
Yes.
Fast and Furious 6 is a great movie. You should watch it.
Bond and Jinx split up, passing through Graves' onboard dojo. It was like a room full of weapons, like a gymnasium kind of thing. Bond gets onto this observation bridge and is about to kill Graves when Grunt notices him and knocks his arm, throwing his aim off balance, meaning that he shoots a hole in a window. Now, let's think back to Goldfinger. What happens in the James Bond universe if you shoot a hole in the window of an airplane?
It explosively decompresses.
By howdy.
And everyone gets sucked out.
Yeah, Vlad is the first to go. He just whoop, gone. And then over the course of the scene, everyone else will fly out until it's just Bond and Graves in there. Jinx is flying the plane, and she gets it low enough that the air pressure is no longer a problem and stabilizes it at like 5,000 feet or something.
Yep.
And then she finds that there is a sword at her neck, and Miranda Frost at the other end of that sword, who tells her to put it on autopilot so that they can have a fight, I guess.
Miranda Frost inexplicably wearing only like a weird bra top.
It's kind of amazing. She's wearing white, wide-legged, high-waisted pants, like a health goth sports bra. And
very evocative. Thank you.
No problem. I'm trying to paint a picture with my words. And also black are the elbow-length gloves that she's wearing. So she's got like a bare midriff and an open back and these elbow-length gloves. And it is an unusual outfit.
She has had a strange journey from MI6 cryptographer to full-blown evil sword queen.
Yeah, we stand an evil sword queen.
What is this costume?
I don't know.
It's quite something, even if it has absolutely no place being on this character. It's a look. Some decisions were made in costuming.
Oh, she's serving up looks all right. Just before they leave the cockpit, Jinx slightly adjusts the course of the autopilot, which means that as it seems like they're the only 4 people left on the plane, as she and Jinx are walking through this weapons room and Graves and Bond are still fighting on the Zeppelin deck, the plane flies through the path of the orbital laser, which is quite destructive, but not as destructive as I would have thought, in that the plane continues flying through it and is still airborne when it comes out the other side of the laser.
Yes. It's not in good shape, though. It's like it's now discarding parts and all the paint is burned off.
Yeah.
It's sort of disintegrating in midair throughout all of this.
Oh, hey, we figured out why Jinx had that knife belt way back at the beginning, because she uses knives, even though we've only ever seen her use guns.
I'm glad they established that.
She has knives now, and she throws a knife at Frost and misses, but it does pierce a copy of Sun Tzu's The Art of War that is on display. So they start having a ridiculous sword fight, and Bond and Graves are fighting. You know, both these pairs of people are fighting as this plane is getting closer and closer to not being a plane anymore. And the end result of the pair of them is, I mentioned it earlier, that Halle Berry had the worst line in the movie, as she surprises Miranda Frost by picking up the knife that has The Art of War impaled upon it, stabbing her in the torso, and then before kicking the knife all of the way into the torso, saying, "Read this, bitch."
What happens when you stab a toad with a knife through a book?
You have to swear at it first.
The same thing as everyone else. All right, so back down to the observation deck where Graves and Bond are fighting. And Bond has had less success murdering his villain, and in fact finds himself on the receiving end of a 100,000 volt shock that doesn't kill him because apparently not Gustav, whatever his name was, the tech guy who didn't bother to consider the amperage that he was running through this gauntlet. But it leaves him incapacitated on the floor, and Gustav takes this moment, or Graves takes this moment to gloat to Bond and says something to the effect of, "Hey, look, parachutes for both of us to escape," and then pitches one out the window and goes, "Oops, not anymore." He proceeds to strap on the parachute as Bond is writhing on the floor, straps on the parachute over top of his RoboCop torso, and is like, "All right, cool. Well, this was fun, but I'm going to leave you here to die, and I'm going to make a hasty retreat." Bond takes this opportunity to reach up and just pull the parachute on him. So the parachute pops out, of course, goes out the window behind Graves, the open window, and sucks Graves out of the aircraft and through the jet engine. And so ends Graves.
You know what? I will give it that. That's a good Bond villain death.
It is. I in fact actually missed one point, which is he gets hoisted by his own petard, as a good Bond villain must, because the parachute sucks him out the window, but he does manage to grab on to the side of the plane, and Bond reaches out as he's like holding on, trying not to, die. Bond reaches over and presses the electrical shock button on his suit, causing him to shock himself because I guess he's touching metal and creating an arc. Graves gets all electrified, and that causes him to let go, and then he gets sucked through the jet engine. So there's a layer of irony there.
Because the quarter of a RoboCop, or however much RoboCop we determined that he is, also gets destroyed in the jet engine, that means that the Icarus laser system shuts down just dozens of meters away from the end run of its path through the DMZ, which we forgot to mention, because it's not particularly relevant, to be honest, was the bunker in the South Korean end of the DMZ where M and Damien Falco are hanging out.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't even pick that up. Because you're right, it's totally unimportant.
They try to make it like additional stakes, and it is, but like they don't do a great job of making it clear that like that's what's going to happen. But like as soon as the thing shuts off, everyone's like, "Ugh," and Falco gets a cigarette and is like,
yeah.
Ugh. So back on the plane, Bond's like, "Well, I guess it's just you and me, Jinx, but there's no way to get off of this." And Jinx delivers the double entendre of guess we're going down together. And Bond says, wait, not necessarily. And so they go down to the cargo hold, got to one up the living daylights. They send Graves' fancy supercars out, but get into a helicopter and eject that out the back of the cargo plane. And so the helicopter just sort of falls out as the plane finally disintegrates and explodes and falls to the ground. And then as this helicopter is falling, Bond powers up the helicopter such that they don't just smash into the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I did try to Google this, and everything that came up was, hey, I just watched Die Another Day, and can you do this? The general consensus is like, probably. Like if a helicopter's falling and you get the engine going and then you spin the rotors fast enough to create lift, then like probably. The problem is more like A, helicopters are not transported with the rotors like that. And B,
Right.
helicopter rotors are kind of flexy. And if like they're kept straight out by the centripetal force of the spinning, and if a helicopter is falling, they might just be sort of like bending upwards in a way that's not very useful.
Right. Although I do wonder if there's like a gyrocopter effect, because like in a gyrocopter, the propellers or the blades of the prop on top of a gyrocopter are kept moving not by the engine, but by the lift force generated by the forward motion of the vehicle. And so like, would you get that same gyro effect if your helicopter was sort of like pointed forward? Would the motion of the air cause the rotors to start to spin in such a way that would allow the engine to take over and work with it? Or would it slow the descent? Like, obviously this is not going to work if your helicopter's in a flip on the way down, but if it's like correctly vertically oriented, maybe. I think the bigger problem with all this is that there's no one on Earth who would ever be willing to attempt it to find out.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Certainly not from a height of 5,000 feet.
No.
But it works in Bond, and you know what? That's fine. And they fly away past the two supercars having nosed down in the middle of a muddy agricultural field.
Which is a great little shot.
Yeah. Back at, oh God, right, this scene. Back at MI6, Moneypenny is doing some clerical work, and you see James Bond has been reclassified 00 and reinstated to full active duty, and Miranda Frost is missing, whereabouts unknown, and for immediate release through the World Press agencies, a freak electrical storm ravages a North Korean minefield. Observation plane missing, crew unaccounted for. Graves feared dead. So that's their cover story. Bond walks in, and they exchange pleasantries and then immediately start making out, like heavily, like shoving Moneypenny's computer off the desk, making out. And like it gets way further than Bond and Moneypenny have ever gone. And then we cut to Q going, what's going on over there, Moneypenny? As you realize that Moneypenny is using the virtual reality training simulator device from earlier in the movie to engage in some fantasy.
She looks so flustered. Why is her blouse undone? She goes to button up her blouse again. She's like, I was just testing it.
I don't know. I don't know why. And Q, oblivious, says, oh, yes, well, it's very hard, isn't it? And she says, yes. Which, of course, again, this is just glasses. You can't feel any of this stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh, this is where the other musical cue is. As soon as we cut away, there's a musical hit that's like do 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 do, which is again like evocative of You Only Live Twice.
Oh, it so is. You're right.
The other one that I noticed in the movie, but I can't remember where, was From Russia with Love. A notable like From Russia with Love hit somewhere in the movie as well. But
I think they should just do that, and like not only when it's a special 40th anniversary or something. It should just be part of the musical language of Bond films, you know?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. We see the helicopter parked on a sea cliff beside a small shrine building. I don't know how Bond got reclassified already. I assume that was part of the fantasy, I guess. Inside the building is a statue of Buddha, which was another reason that the South Koreans didn't like this, is that there's a statue of Buddha that then pans over to Bond and Jinx post-coitus. And all the diamonds also, a bunch of Graves diamonds. And so there's, oh, right, God, I forgot. There's even more innuendo. Because it's outside the building and you hear Jinx say like, look at that. It's a perfect fit. No, don't take it out. Put it back in. And it's like, what is happening? And then you get in there and they're like putting diamonds into her navel. It's just like, God, stop being so horny. They're like, obviously we have to give all these diamonds back, right? Yeah, I guess we do.
That's what it means to be good. And then she's like, I'm so good.
And that's it. That's where it ends.
Yeah.
Woof.
So what did you think?
I didn't like it.
Yeah, it's not very good, is it?
No, it really isn't. You know who else shares your sentiment that it was too much?
Everyone? But who in particular?
In particular, Roger Moore,
Oh, wow.
who is quoted as saying, "I thought it just went too far. And that's from me, the first Bond in space."
I adore Roger Moore's self-awareness.
He definitely is. Of anyone who played Bond, he certainly was like in the role the most like outside of the movies and like kept up with the series, you know? Like he was like, "Look, I'm James Bond and I'm going to be James Bond for the rest of my life and I accept and embrace that." You know?
Right.
And then he became a goodwill ambassador for UNICEF.
Nice.
Yeah, I like Roger Moore. I don't like this movie. Where are we ranking things?
All right. Well, let's start with the pre-title. We've got Hovercraft Chase.
That's about it. They surf ashore and then there's a hovercraft chase.
And everything that could blow up does blow up when looked at incorrectly.
I don't mind it.
It's okay.
It's all right.
It's big and bombastic and exciting, and that's fine. We didn't talk about it much over the course of this movie. Like, we talked about specific bad shots, but this movie is really ugly. This movie is not pretty.
That is also true.
A lot of the locations and a lot of the cinematography and just like a lot of this movie is really bland or flat or ugly. And this scene is really indicative of that. Everything in this scene, with the exception of the multitudinous fireballs, everything from the point at which Bond arrives in the camp to the point at which the scene ends is brown or olive drab, with no exceptions. It's just mud, but it's fun. It's exciting. It could be worse.
I think it is better than the one for the original Diamonds Are Forever.
Yes, I agree with that.
And I also think it's better than For Your Eyes Only, which is dumping fake Blofeld into the smokestack.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that's about where it stops for me. I'm going up my list from the bottom. Octopussy was the horse race and the jet.
Oh, right. I would put it in about the same category as the horse race and the jet.
Yeah, so I'm going to put this between Octopussy and For Your Eyes Only on my list, which is fairly far down. It's just not, it's fine.
Yeah.
I don't think this is as bad as the rest of the movie.
No, I agree with you. I think I'm going to go one higher than you, which for me is still below Octopussy, but above Thunderball.
Song.
The song. Graham.
What are you thinking?
Oh, I've already thought. It's already in the document. It's in our spreadsheet.
Oh, you are putting it at the bottom of your list.
This song is not good. And like I look at what's here and I like Never Say Never Again better than this. The opening titles of Dr. No are not great as a Bond song, but it's still like the opening titles are good. Look of Love is Look of Love. Can't argue with that. The various ballads and things, even the ones that I don't think are good, I don't hate. I just don't want to listen to this song. And the fact that the visuals that go with it don't redeem it in any way, this is just a huge misfire.
I also don't want to listen to this song, but I also really don't like Never Say Never Again. And I don't think I can put it at worse than Dr. No. But you will be happy to know that even though this has been a bugbear this whole time, I will put this below From Russia with Love.
All right. Where do you think the film lives?
Our bottom 5 is exactly the same right now. Going down the list from the best of our bottom 5 to the bottom: Thunderball, Diamonds Are Forever, Octopussy, Never Say Never Again, and Casino Royale 1967.
Mm-hmm.
I assume it's somewhere in there.
Straight worse than The World Is Not Enough. No question. Like, no argument whatsoever. It is straight worse.
As it turns out, the Brosnan movies absolutely do move in a downward progression.
Yes, I would not call it linear.
No, it's not. It really isn't.
It's like a hockey stick, but they do descend in quality. So, straight worse than The World Is Not Enough. I'd rather watch The Man with the Golden Gun. I'd rather watch Thunderball. I don't know that I'd rather watch Diamond. I'd rather watch Diamonds. I do know. It goes there between Diamonds and Octopussy. I think the big bombastic, over-the-top nature of this one saves it a little bit in relation to Octopussy, which is just kind of nothing makes sense and also this is bad. Whereas this is just ludicrosity turned up. So at least it has that entertainment value going for it. But I don't think it's a very good movie, and I don't think it's a very good Bond movie.
On the basis of it being pure camp, I would rather watch Octopussy.
That's fair. Have at it.
So I'm putting it one below between Octopussy and Never Say Never Again.
All the way through, we've been like, I'm being softer on this movie this time around than I thought I would have been. I was fully anticipating coming into this and dropping it in the bottom slot and just being like, this is unwatchable. It's not. It is definitely better than Casino Royale. And in my opinion, Never Say Never Again. I think I just have more fun watching this than Octopussy.
Like, I assumed the opposite. I figured that we'd be like, all right, it's Die Another Day. Yeah, it's the bad one. We're going to come in and we're going to watch it. We're going to be like, you know what? This is not as bad as I remember it being in 2002. And there's a lot of stuff that redeems it. But it's just riddled. It is completely saturated with moments that are like, that doesn't work. That doesn't make sense. Why is it like this? And, Judi Dench continues to be herself. Rosamund Pike is great in what she was given. Brosnan kind of feels like he's just here for this particular movie. I don't mind Graves, but he doesn't really grab me as a villain. Halle Berry has the trying too hard to be cool problem and the terrible dialogue that she's given to work with. To me, there's nothing in this movie that's great.
Yeah.
The whole time we were talking about it, there's nothing that we were like, well, now this, despite everything else we've said, this thing is really, really awesome. There were moments that were like, yeah, this is fun. You know, like, I like the sword fight. It's a good sword fight. Any other Bond movie would be like, yeah, all right, no, sure, cool scene. Cool ice chase with the cars and everything. Yeah, you know, that fun moments. Fun Q scene, neat stuff with all the seeing in the background props. All right, cool. But there's nothing that's like, okay, yes, Die Another Day honks out loud, but there is that one thing. There isn't that one thing.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with you. There are things that are less worse than the rest of the film, but there's no one thing that you can point to and be like, well, that's worth watching the movie for. That doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Question.
Yes.
What's your most Bond moment?
Wow, I didn't even think about that.
I know what mine is, and it has nothing to do with Bond.
What is it?
The Lamborghini nose down in the agricultural field. That shot could appear in literally any Bond movie, and it would play.
Yeah. I think for me, it's probably after knocking out, possibly killing the man credited only as Creep, and then walking into his room and just casually greeting the sex worker, just like, hey, what's up? Hi, just no big deal. They're like, yeah, all right, I've done my job. You're apparently doing your job. Carry on.
Yep, that's a good one. All right, I like it. All right, before we move on, I have one more question for you.
Okay.
What's your most moment?
My most moment.
Yeah. This movie is the most of everything, so when does it go most over the top? Where does this movie jump the shark precisely? Or when does it move the dial from 11 to 12?
Harkening back to something you said earlier, I think that moment is the absolutely endlessly innuendo-laden exchange between Bond and Jinx in Havana.
All right, that is a satisfactory answer.
Yeah.
My answer is actually much, much later in the film, but I'm taking this as when this movie goes most over the top, not the specific shark jump, which is when Graves turns around wearing the bug eye mask. There's no saving the film at that point. At that point, it's like, oh no. Oh, honey, no. You have flown too close to the sun, and like an Icarus, you have burned.
When mom says you have RoboCop at home.
Oh, no.
Holy moly. Okay, good news.
Yeah.
Next time it's Casino Royale.
That is good news. I hope it holds up. I've seen it relatively recently. I'm fairly confident that it holds up.
I'm fairly confident it holds up as well. And I've watched it probably 4 times with the riff track, and even then it holds up.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm very hype.
All right, well then that will do it from Rewatch with Love this week. That is a long one. Thanks everybody for listening with us. Matt, thank you always for joining me on this thing.
Anytime.
I want to thank Featherweight for the art, Matt Griffiths for the video editing. If you are listening to this audio only, thank you so much. But do check out the YouTube version if you have time. There's some great visuals in there. Thanks to Heather for podcast admin, and thanks to all of you kind people, and your support of our Patreon at patreon.com/LoadingReadyRun. It supports this show and everything Loading Ready Run does, and we thank you so much for it. Until next time, this podcast will return.